Hey guys, tonight we ease into a story that might just be the slowest moving myth you've ever have heard and promptly forgotten, a stroll, not a sprint, through the least dramatic love story ancient Greece ever coughed up. Imagine, no thundering chariots, no vengeful lightning bolts, and absolutely zero heroic sword fights. Just you, standing at the edge of the river Styx, and the air is so still you can hear the faint slosh of a lazy current. The sky down here isn't black or fiery, it's beige. You probably won't survive this level of excitement. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a corridor of stone, not freshly carved or anciently grand, just sort of there. The underworld this morning is quiet, not ominous. There's no screaming of the damned, no rattling chains, no stern-faced judges hurling proclamations. It's the kind of morning where the main sound is the scratch of a quill on parchment from some corner office where Hades is probably sipping watered-down wine. The torches along the wall flicker, but only in that slow, steady way that makes you want to yawn rather than panic. Even the ferryman, Sharon, seems less moody than usual. He's leaning on his pole, chatting about the weather, which is, to be fair, always the same down here. Bit more of a mist today, he says, as though you'll nod and agree. You do, just to keep things rolling. It's a far cry from the image painted by vase art, where every trip to the underworld involves dark drama and an ominous sense of fate. Mainstream history usually portrays Hades as some shadowy tyrant, stern, distant, possibly plotting the next grand cosmic power play. But this morning you find the realm functioning more like a sleepy civil office. Souls shuffle about in loose lines, none of them looking particularly tormented. They're here to register, to file, whatever paperwork souls have to file. In actual Greek belief, the afterlife wasn't always about torture, it was mostly bureaucracy, with some Elysium perks for the heroic and, well, endless blandness for everyone else. A faint smell of fresh bread wafts from somewhere deep in the tunnels. That's not an illusion, there's a small kitchen here, because even shades need a little ritual comfort. You follow the scent past a group of minor river spirits who seem to be having a heated discussion about whether the Styx or the Acheron is more scenic. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks genuinely believed in such underworld geography, or if poets just like making up names that sounded spooky for dramatic effect. And then you notice something odd, not in the sense of there's a ghost chewing gum odd, but in the sense that there's no tension in the air. Normally, myths involving Hades start with some catastrophe. Today, you hear the rustle of parchment, the creak of wooden chairs, the occasional splash of water. That's it. The absence of drama is the drama. One quirky bit of underworld lore most people never hear, some fragments from obscure poets suggest Hades had an actual schedule. Not a divine, fate-guided routine, but a calendar with appointments. Meetings with river gods. Audits of how many shades were stuck in Asphodel versus Elysium. Inspections of the gates. Imagine the god of death as a meticulous office manager. Well, that's more or less what you're walking into today. You pass Cerberus, the famed three-headed guardian. On most pottery, he's drawn mid-snarl, fangs bared. Here, though, all three heads are dozing, tails thumping lazily whenever someone walks by with a snack. One head snores, another twitches in a dream, the third just blinks at you in slow acknowledgement. There's no threat. You scratch behind one ear, because why not, and keep walking. The underworld feels alive in its own muted way. A few shades are gathered at a low table, playing some sort of board game with flat stones. Someone's humming. A wisp of what might be incense curls lazily upward. You start to realize that the myths you've heard about abduction, about cries echoing across the land, probably came from people who'd never actually been here and wanted to make the underworld sound profitable for storytellers. A side corridor opens to an indoor garden, if you can call it that. The soil is pale, the plants low and stubborn, but there are flowers, ghostly white, pale lavender, almost transparent in the dim light. You're not in Persephone's garden yet, but it's the kind of place that tells you she's around somewhere. In myth, she's painted as the tragic maiden or the fearsome queen, depending on the version. Here, though, the neat rows and absence of weeds suggests someone who just enjoys keeping things tidy. And maybe that's why this morning feels like a held breath, because this is a realm that runs on order, not chaos. The river Styx doesn't rage. The judges don't shout. And you get the faint sense that if you linger long enough, you might even hear the distant sound of laughter, low, private, and warm. That's the kind of underworld morning you've stumbled into, no legend making, no epic pronouncements, just the steady heartbeat of a realm doing exactly what it's meant to do. You round another corner, still half expecting to stumble into something myth-worthy, maybe a heroic rescue, or at least some theatrical wailing from a distant cavern. Instead, you find the god of the dead hunched over a desk. No throne of obsidian, no dramatic lighting, just a desk. Sturdy wood, piles of scrolls, and a small oil lamp with a steady flame. Hades doesn't look up right away. He's holding a quill the way you might hold a coffee stirrer, without any joy, but with the resigned determination of someone who's been filling out forms since the Bronze Age. You imagine him writing something grand and ominous, but you catch a glimpse of the parchment, soul intake reports. The kind that lists names, times, and, occasionally, odd notes like insists on bringing pet goat or keeps asking where the elevator is. If you've been picturing him as a storm-eyed villain from a marble frieze, this scene takes the wind right out of it. His robe is tidy but practical, dark, yes, but not billowing with ethereal menace. There's a faint smudge of ink on his thumb. On the corner of the desk, there's a small clay cup, half full of watered wine, the sort you'd sip without thinking. Mainstream accounts, especially those retold in Roman times, painted Hades as aloof and humorless. And yes, you can see the aloof part, he doesn't exactly beam with welcome, but there's no malice here. Just a quiet efficiency, the sort of demeanor you'd expect from the head of a very large, very underfunded public department. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly feared Hades himself, or simply the inevitability he represented. The room itself is surprisingly warm. A brazier glows in one corner, and on a shelf nearby sit neat stacks of more scrolls. You'd think, after thousands of years, they'd have run out of papyrus, but apparently the underworld has a renewable supply. You notice a few little personal touches, too, a small polished stone shaped like a heart, a carved statuette of a horse, a bronze coin mounted in a frame. He finally looks up. His eyes are steady, calm, the kind that could make you confess a crime you didn't commit just to get the conversation over with. "Busy day?" he asks, as if you might be the one with the important schedule. His voice is low, unhurried. You nod, because the idea of explaining your meandering arrival seems more trouble than it's worth. Hades goes back to his work, occasionally pausing to flip through a ledger the size of a paving stone. The sound of the pages turning is rhythmic, almost soothing. At one point, a minor spirit, a shade with neatly braided hair, shuffles in to drop off another pile of documents. "Thank you," Hades says without looking up, and the spirit bows slightly before leaving. You get the sense that everyone here knows their role, and that role involves a lot more patience than the living would tolerate. There's an odd tidbit some lesser-known ancient writers like to include. Hades was said to keep a separate, personal list of notable souls. Not for punishment, not for reward, just because he liked remembering certain individuals. Heroes, philosophers, and the occasional mortal who made him laugh. Whether that list was real or just a poetic flourish is something historians still debate, but you spot a smaller, more worn notebook on his desk and wonder. A faint scratching noise interrupts your thoughts. It's a skeletal-looking creature, part shade, part bird, perched on the back of a chair, pecking at a loose feather in its wing. Hades reaches over absently and offers it a small crumb of bread from a plate you hadn't noticed. There's no grand announcement, no ceremonial feeding of a sacred beast. Just a quiet, habitual act of kindness. And that's the thing, you start realizing that Hades runs his realm the way a meticulous librarian might run a library. Everything cataloged, everyone in their place, disruptions minimized. The myths that paint him as a villain leave out the part where he's just keeping the system going. You wouldn't call it glamorous, but there's a dignity to it. At one point, he catches you glancing at the mountain of scrolls. It's the backlog, he says dryly. There's always a backlog. He taps one pile with the quill. These are just from last century. You're not sure if that's a joke, but the faintest flicker of amusement crosses his face before it smooths back into calm. Somewhere deeper in the palace, a bell chimes, not the toll of doom you'd expect, but more like the polite ring in a quiet shop. Hades sets down his quill and stands, stretching with the creak of someone who has sat in the same position for far too long. I suppose she'll be back soon, he murmurs, almost to himself. You don't need to ask who, there's only one she that could cause even this subtle shift in his tone. For now, though, he returns to his desk, flipping the next page with deliberate care. The quill scratches on. The underworld hums in its muted way. And you realize that, in a place built on the weight of eternity, paperwork might just be the most powerful magic of all. You hear her before you see her, not in the theatrical, cue heavenly chorus kind of way, but in the soft rustle of fabric, the click of sensible sandals on polished stone, and a faint scent of crushed herbs in the air. Persephone moves through the underworld like someone who belongs here, which is maybe the least dramatic part of all. She steps into the room without ceremony. No beams of sunlight follow her, no sudden hush falls over the shades. She just slips in, carrying a woven basket with the ease of someone who's been making this trip for centuries. You glance inside and see neatly arranged sprigs of mint, a handful of figs, and, because the universe likes a cliché, 3 glossy pomegranate seeds. Mainstream tellings make her seasonal journey sound like an ordeal, kidnapping, wailing mothers, vengeful gods. But what you're watching now is more like a calm commuter arriving home after a slightly long weekend. In actual Greek agricultural festivals, Persephone's return marked the start of planting season, but not every version of the myth treated it like a cosmic soap opera. Some simply saw it as part of nature's quiet rhythm. She greets Hades with a nod, like someone acknowledging the only other person who knows how to fix the coffee machine. There's a moment of silence, not awkward, just the kind that stretches comfortably between people who've shared the same air for a very long time. Then she places the basket on his desk and starts arranging the herbs on a small clay tray. Quirky fact, certain late Hellenistic sources claim Persephone kept a small kitchen garden even in the underworld. Not a metaphorical one, a literal patch of soil where she grew things mortals couldn't quite see. Historians still argue whether that was an actual part of the myth or just a poetic flourish to explain the ghostly blooms carved into some funerary art. Today, it's easy to imagine it's true. She plucks a sprig of mint, crushes it lightly between her fingers, and drops it into a jug of water. The scent drifts across the room, cutting through the dry parchment and brazier smell. Hades watches without comment, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, before returning to his ledger. She starts talking, not in some grand monologue, but in the easy, meandering way you might update a friend about the weather and the neighbors. The mortal realm's fields were behaving. Demeter was still on about that frost last year, and a fox had been spotted trying to steal figs from the edge of her garden. It's all delightfully unmythic. What's surprising is how much ground she covers without any of it being urgent. In this telling, Persephone isn't a pawn in a godly feud or a tragic figure doomed to split her time. She's organized, balanced, the kind of person who probably color codes her planting schedule. Hades listens, occasionally nodding or offering a brief comment. The fox will come back, he says at one point, and she gives him a look that says she already knows. There's a rhythm to it, the calm exchange of two people who don't need to fill the silence to prove they're close. If you were expecting sparks, longing gazes, or the faint hum of doomed romance, this isn't it. This is the kind of connection built on routine, on knowing exactly how the other person takes their tea, or which chair they'll choose at the table without asking. You realize that for all the stories of gods and heroes burning bright and burning out, here's a pair who've mastered the art of just coexisting without setting the place on fire. Persephone moves to a low shelf, takes out a small wooden box, and from it retrieves a folded cloth embroidered with faint floral patterns. You wouldn't think embroidery would last in the underworld, but apparently, when you're queen, you can bend the rules of decay. She drapes it over the corner of the desk, smoothing it flat with the palm of her hand. It's the sort of detail no myth ever mentions, but it changes the whole tone of the room, just a bit more human, a bit less eternal stone and shadow. She tells a story about one of the river spirits accidentally knocking over a jar of honey into the leafy, which resulted in a swarm of bees that had absolutely no memory of where they were going. You chuckle, because you can picture it, tiny, disoriented bees drifting aimlessly in circles over the forgetful waters. Hades' mouth twitches again, not a laugh, exactly, but close. The hours here don't seem to matter. There's no rush, no schedule beyond the steady flow of existence. You imagine her walking the same corridors later, greeting shades she's known for centuries, maybe stopping to water that ghostly garden. Above ground, Demeter will watch the fields change with the seasons. Down here, Persephone will keep things in quiet bloom. And as you watch her settle into her chair, one hand resting on the table, the other absent-mindedly twirling a fig stem, you realize that love stories don't have to be epic to endure. Sometimes they're just made of steady arrivals, familiar baskets, and conversations that never need to be retold because the people in them already know every word. The garden is tucked behind a low archway and down a gently sloping corridor, the air getting cooler and softer as you descend. You half expect something wild and fantastical, trees with glowing leaves, flowers that sing, the works. Instead, it's neat. Rows of plants arranged with an almost obsessive sense of order. The soil is pale, as if made from powdered marble, and the light comes from no visible source, just a steady, silvery glow that makes the edges of leaves look faintly translucent. Persephone moves ahead of you, basket on her arm, humming faintly. It's not the haunting song of a goddess summoning life from death. It's the same kind of tune you might hear from someone making tea in the kitchen. The path curves between low beds of underworld blossoms, ghost lilies with petals so thin they ripple at the faintest breath, pale blue thyme that smells like cool rain, and the occasional stubborn mortal plant that somehow thrives in this impossible place. Mainstream versions of the myth rarely dwell on what Persephone does when she's down here, beyond reigning as queen. But in some Orphic fragments, small, obscure pieces of text, you get hints that she tended gardens as part of her role, a symbolic act of maintaining the balance between life and death. Historians still argue whether these gardens were metaphorical, representing the souls of the dead, or if ancient storytellers really pictured her with dirt under her fingernails. Here, though, it's very literal. She kneels beside a patch of something that looks suspiciously like lavender, the ghostly kind where the purple is more suggestion than color. You have to keep the soil damp, she says, almost to herself, but not wet. She presses her palm to the earth, then sprinkles a little water from a clay jug she's brought along. You notice that the jug has a small crack near the rim. This is not a goddess obsessed with perfection. She just makes do. Hades isn't far behind, though he's more observer than participant. He walks slowly, hands clasped behind his back, occasionally pausing to study a plant as if it might suddenly reveal a cosmic secret. When Persephone hands him a small pair of shears, he takes them without question, trims exactly 3 leaves from a nearby stalk, and hands them back. You suspect this is his way of helping. The air here is warmer than the halls above. There's a faint hum you can't quite place, like the vibration of a distant harp string. A shade drifts past on the far side of the garden, carrying a basket of fallen petals. It nods politely at Persephone before gliding away. Apparently even the dead know to tread lightly here. You spot a strange plant near the center, tall, with silver-veined leaves and blossoms that seem to open and close on their own. Persephone catches your eye and smiles faintly. That one only blooms when it's completely silent. She stands still for a few moments, and sure enough, the petals unfurl just enough to catch the glow. Then the moment passes, and they curl inward again. Quirky detail, some ancient grave goods from southern Italy show small bronze models of plants, possibly as offerings to Persephone. Archaeologists still debate whether these were symbolic gifts for a role as goddess of vegetation, or just particularly well-crafted funerary art. Either way, it's clear she had a reputation for caring about plants, not just ruling over the dead. There's no rush in her work. She moves from bed to bed, trimming here, loosening soil there, occasionally dropping a seed into place. Hades follows at his slow pace, looking less like a fearsome ruler and more like a very patient spouse waiting while someone chooses exactly the right melon at the market. Every so often, he murmurs something to her, low, short phrases that make her lips twitch with amusement. You realize the peace here isn't just in the plants, it's in the way they move together. No declarations of passion, no theatrical gestures. Just the quiet trust of 2 people who've walked these rows side by side for longer than history remembers. At one point, Persephone brushes dirt from her hands, stands, and surveys the whole space with a small nod. That's enough for today, she says, and you notice the faintest golden shimmer in the air around her as she speaks, as if the garden itself leans in to listen. Hades offers his arm, she takes it without thinking, and together they walk back toward the main hall, leaving behind the faint scent of rain-soaked thyme and the soft hum of blossoms breathing in the glow. The thing about pomegranate seeds is that they've been exaggerated almost as much as Hades' personality. In most retellings, they're the ultimate symbol of the underworld deal, eat a seed, and boom, your fate is sealed. But the truth, at least in the version you're walking into, is far less dramatic. The 2 of them are seated at a small table near a low-burning brazier. There's no throne, no crown, no ceremonial amphora brought forth by trembling servants. Just a clay bowl of glistening pomegranate seeds, a small plate of cheese, and a carafe of something that smells faintly like spiced wine. Persephone picks up one seed and turns it between her fingers, holding it up to the light before popping it into her mouth. These are sweeter than last year, she says casually. Hades nods. The grove by the Acheron, he replies, as if that explains everything. And it does, to them, at least. In the grand mythic narrative, this is the moment where the world tilts, the maiden eats the seeds, the cycle of life and death is bound, the seasons are locked into their eternal pattern. But here, it's just a snack. A thoughtful one, sure, but still a snack. If anything, it feels like 2 people negotiating over who gets the last slice of bread, not hammering out a cosmic contract. A quirky fact most storytellers skip. In some ancient versions, Persephone doesn't accidentally trap herself by eating the seeds, she eats them deliberately, knowing exactly what it means. Historians still argue whether this was a sign of her agency or a later attempt to make her look more like an equal partner in the myth. In this room, though, there's no sign of trickery or regret, only the kind of mutual decision that's been discussed 100 times before. Persephone slides the bowl toward Hades. He takes 3 seeds without hesitation, which you think might be his idea of being generous. He bites into them one by one, chewing slowly, eyes briefly closing as the juice bursts in his mouth. This is not the face of a man sealing a fateful bargain, it's the face of someone appreciating good fruit. They talk while they eat, soft, unhurried conversation about orchard yields, a minor dispute between 2 river spirits, and whether the underworld kitchen should start baking bread twice a day instead of once. The topics are ordinary, but each thread weaves into the other until you can't tell where small talk ends and quiet affection begins. At one point, Persephone leans back in her chair and tells a story about a shade who insisted he'd been promised an entire pomegranate, not just the seeds. Hades raises an eyebrow. And? She smiles. We gave him one. He's still peeling it. You chuckle, and for a moment, so does Hades, though it's more like a low rumble than a laugh. The table between them is simple, worn smooth by years of use. You notice faint scratches along the edge, as if someone once tried to carve something and then thought better of it. A closer look reveals the half-formed outline of a leaf. Maybe one of them started it during a long conversation, or maybe some passing spirit got bored while waiting to deliver a message. Either way, it feels like the kind of small, human imperfection that makes the whole scene more real. Another detail, there's no rush to clear the table. They linger long after the seeds are gone, Hades swirling the last of his wine in the cup, Persephone resting her chin on her hand. The brazier's glow softens, throwing gentle light over the bowls and cups. Time moves differently here, not in the ticking clock way of the mortal world, but in slow, steady currents. Eventually, Persephone gathers the empty bowl and stands, moving toward the kitchen alcove. Hades follows, carrying the carafe. They work in quiet tandem, she rinses the bowl, he dries it, she sets the cheese plate on the shelf, he wipes the table. You get the sense they've done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands, without ever needing to say who does what. If the myths were right, this moment should be tense, full of bargaining and subtle threats. But here, it's just 2 people sharing fruit and cleaning up afterward. And maybe that's the real secret, the underworld's most famous love story isn't built on drama at all. It's built on seed bowls, slow conversation, and the simple act of clearing a table together before the day goes on. You've been conditioned by every epic, every painted amphora, and every school textbook to expect a wedding of the gods to be a spectacle, winged messengers darting through the sky, feasts that spill across mountainsides, perhaps even a few mortals turned into trees for looking at the bride the wrong way. What actually happened between Hades and Persephone? Well, you might want to brace yourself for something far more underwhelming. The underworld's great hall is not the cavernous, echoing throne room you've been sold in myth. It's spacious enough, sure, but the ceiling's low enough to keep voices from bouncing, and the stone walls are hung with woven tapestries in soft shades of gray and green. The long tables are set with clay cups and wooden plates, not gold or silver. And the centerpiece? A modest arrangement of pale flowers from Persephone's own garden, tucked into a vase that's slightly chipped along one side. Mainstream history records no grand festival for this union. In fact, most accounts skip straight from he takes her to she is queen. There's a conspicuous gap in the record where the ceremony should be. Historians still argue whether this means the Greeks didn't think the wedding itself was important, or whether it happened quietly enough to slip under the poet's radar. What you're watching now looks less like a royal wedding and more like a very polite dinner party. A handful of notable underworld figures are present: Sharon, who has taken the rare step of leaving his boat for the night, the three judges of the dead, seated together in surprisingly good humor, and a few nymphs from Persephone's time above, who are still peering curiously at the dim surroundings. Persephone wears a gown of deep green, not the bridal white you'd expect, embroidered with tiny silver threads in the shape of leaves. Her hair is gathered loosely at the nape of her neck, with a single sprig of her garden's ghost lavender tucked in like a hairpin. Hades, for his part, wears a dark robe with a simple braided belt. No crown, no armor, no gaudy displays. Just himself, looking as though he'd rather get this over with so the food can be served. The ceremony, such as it is, consists of them standing together before a small altar, placing their hands on a shallow bowl of pomegranate wine, and each taking a sip. That's it. No booming declarations from Zeus, no lightning split across the ceiling, no divine chorus. The witnesses murmur their approval, and someone, probably one of the kitchen spirits, rings a small bronze bell. Quirky fact: there's an obscure inscription from a rural part of Arcadia that describes a similar ritual for sealing a bond, not of marriage, but of partnership between farmers. They shared a drink, exchanged a few words, and got back to work. The ceremony here has that same practical energy, something to mark the change, but not an event that swallows the whole day. Dinner follows immediately. Bread is broken, cheese passed around, figs piled onto platters. There's roasted fish for those who can still taste, and bowls of spiced grain for those who can't. Cerberus sits near the hearth, tails thumping whenever scraps are tossed his way. A pair of shades start a quiet song in the corner, low, steady harmonies that make the air feel warmer. You notice how often Persephone and Hades exchange small looks across the table. Not dramatic, burning gazes, but the sort you give when you're both thinking the same thing, whether it's about the music, or the slightly uneven roast, or the fact that Sharon is definitely hoarding the olives. At one point, Persephone leans over to murmur something in Hades' ear. His expression doesn't change much, but his hand briefly covers hers on the table. It's a small, steadying gesture, one that speaks more than any grand toast could. When the meal winds down, there's no raucous dancing, no drunken revelry. The guests slip away in pairs or small groups, offering nods and quiet blessings. Hades and Persephone remain seated at the now cluttered table for a while longer, speaking in low tones as they finish the last of the wine. By the time they stand, the hall is almost empty. The torches have burned low, casting soft pools of light that seem to follow them as they walk toward the garden. No crowds, no applause, just two figures moving side by side into the next chapter of their very undramatic story. You might imagine that after a wedding, especially one involving the ruler of the underworld, there would be a honeymoon of epic proportions. Perhaps a chariot drawn by night-black horses, skimming over seas of molten rock, or a private feast on some misty isle no mortal could ever find. Instead, Persephone spends the next morning elbow-deep in soil. It's not that Hades can't offer her luxuries. He could, in theory, order up entire waterfalls of silver, have the vaults of the dead empty for her adornment, or commission statues that would make the living weep. But when he quietly asks her what she'd like to do on her first full day as queen, she just glances toward the walled plot she's been eyeing since her arrival. It's a peculiar space, this underworld garden, half cultivated, half left to grow wild. The air is still and dry, but the earth here is strangely fertile, as if every seed that falls into it carries the weight of centuries. The plants are not quite what you'd see above. Petals are translucent, stems are streaked with silver, leaves curl into shapes that seem to watch you. There are pale poppies that only open when shadows fall across them, and vines whose blossoms emit a soft glow when the torches go out. Persephone moves among them like she's meeting old acquaintances. She kneels to touch the soil, crumbles it in her palm, tilts her head to catch the faint scent of a flower that doesn't seem to have a name. She doesn't flinch when one of the vines wraps lazily around her wrist. It's not threatening, just curious. Hades stays at the garden gate for a while, hands clasped behind his back, watching her work. He's not much of a gardener himself. His idea of plant care usually involves leaving it alone until it dies, and then ensuring its remains are properly buried. But he recognizes something in her posture, the steady focus, the unhurried patience of someone who doesn't mind waiting a long time to see results. They talk in fragments. She asks if the soil here has ever been turned. He admits he doesn't know, but the shades sometimes gather dead leaves for compost. She wonders if the glowing vines could be coaxed into weaving an arch over the path. He says it would be possible, though the vines tend to sulk when moved. By mid-afternoon, she's gathered a small basket of seeds from the far corner of the plot, tiny black ones shaped like teardrops, and a handful of flat white ones that rattle faintly when shaken. She doesn't say what she plans to grow with them, and he doesn't ask. Quirky fact, ancient Greek writers occasionally mentioned gardens of the dead, though they usually meant small shrines with plants symbolic of loss or rebirth, cypress, myrtle, asphodel. There's no surviving account of anyone trying to actively cultivate one as Persephone is doing now. If this experiment succeeds, she'll be the first queen to turn the underworld into a place where something new can grow. As she plants, she hums under her breath, a tune so soft and steady it almost blends into the sound of the soil shifting. Hades eventually wanders inside to fetch a pair of simple cups and a pitcher of pomegranate water, returning to sit on a stone bench nearby. He doesn't interrupt. He just stays there, listening, letting the silence between them fill with the sound of earth and breath. By evening, her hands are stained and her knees dusty. She wipes her forehead with the back of her arm and steps back to look at the neat rows she's made. There's nothing to see yet, just bare earth, but her expression says she can already imagine the future. Hades offers her the cup. She takes it, drinks, and sits beside him. For a long time they watch the faint shimmer of the garden under torchlight. No one comes to announce a feast, no heralds cry their names. There's only the steady glow of the blossoms, the slow cooling of the air, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the seeds will still be there, waiting. The next few days slip into a rhythm, one that feels almost strange in the underworld, where the concept of days is more poetic than practical. There's no sun here, no moon, no reliable clock but the beating of one's own pulse. Yet Persephone manages to impose her own version of time, rising from her chambers, tending the garden, then walking the winding corridors with an unhurried step that somehow changes the mood of the place. It doesn't escape Hades' notice that some of his staff, if you can call shades and skeletal attendant staff, begin moving differently when she's around. The shades, usually listless, drift closer to doorways she passes, as if they want to be near the soft rustle of her gown. Even Cerberus, a beast who normally reserves his gentlest manner for Hades alone, begins lying at the edge of her garden, three heads resting on crossed paws, watching her work like a devoted guard. On the fourth day, Persephone invites Hades to join her in planting. He hesitates. He's not used to being invited anywhere. Usually, people are either commanded to appear before him or they vanish quickly when he arrives. But she stands there, hands on her hips, a little smear of soil on her cheek, holding out a small packet of seeds. "You should try it," she says. "It's different when you've put it in the ground yourself." And so the ruler of the dead kneels in the dirt. It's awkward at first. His cloak bunches at his knees, and the heavy rings on his fingers keep catching in the soil. Persephone shows him how to press the seeds in with just enough pressure, then cover them lightly so the sprouts can push through without breaking. He listens, carefully, his usual crisp, efficient gestures softened by her slower, steadier pace. When he's finished his small row, he looks at it like it's a contract he's just signed. "Now what?" he asks. "Now you wait," she says simply. "And you try not to dig it up to check if it's working." The corner of his mouth twitches, not quite a smile, but dangerously close. That evening, she takes him somewhere she's discovered on her solitary walks, a narrow gallery at the very edge of his palace. From here, the view is strange and vast, rolling fields of asphodel stretching into a dim horizon, rivers like thin ribbons of ink winding between them. In the distance, faint glows mark the homes of the dead, scattered like lanterns. "This is the quietest place I've found here," she tells him. "Even the spirits don't come often. I think they prefer where the air feels heavier." He leans on the stone balustrade, considering her words. "This is where I come," he says after a moment. "When I need to think without eyes on me." They stand together in silence, the kind of silence that has weight but not pressure. Below, a single shade wanders the field, a pale blur against the dark. Persephone breaks the stillness with a question. "Why did you build the garden?" Hades doesn't answer right away. "I didn't," he says finally. "It was here before me. Before any of the palaces. The land itself made it." Something about that stirs her imagination, the idea that the underworld itself wanted a place where things could grow, even in darkness. She glances at him, wondering if he sees the poetry in it too, but his expression is unreadable. Quirky fact, in some rare fragments from Orphic traditions, the underworld wasn't imagined purely as a place of decay, it was also thought of as a womb of the earth, where seeds slept before sprouting in the living world. The same soil that received the dead could, symbolically, bring forth new life. Persephone, as both queen and seasonal goddess, would have been the perfect embodiment of that paradox. When they leave the gallery, Hades doesn't return to his throne room. Instead, he follows her back to the garden. They walk between the new rows in the torchlight, saying nothing, but his steps are slower than usual. By the time they part for the night, a small, unnoticed change has taken root, not in the soil, but in the space between them. The next morning, Persephone wakes with the faintest thrill, an almost childish curiosity, wondering if the seeds she planted with Hades have done anything overnight. She knows it's far too soon for shoots to appear, but still, she slips into her slippers and walks to the garden before breakfast. Predictably, the earth looks unchanged. But there's a peculiar satisfaction in kneeling there, brushing her fingers lightly over the soil where they work together. She imagines the seeds stirring below, tiny and unseen, and for a moment she wonders if Hades has ever thought of the dead the same way, quietly waiting, holding the potential of something else. By midday, Hades appears, not with the solemn pace he usually carries, but in an oddly restless manner. He asks her to walk with him, and this time, instead of the familiar palace corridors, they take a path down into the deeper reaches of the realm. The way grows colder, the air thinner. Persephone realizes they are heading toward the river Lethe. The Lethe is unlike the Styx or the Acheron. Where those rivers churn with a kind of brute, dangerous energy, Lethe is almost painfully still, the water a flat sheet of dull silver. Here, shades come to drink, to forget their lives entirely, to empty themselves of joy and grief alike. It's both a mercy and a final erasure. Hades stands at the edge, watching the faint shapes of the dead approach the bank. "Most think this is the saddest place in my realm," he says, his voice low. "But I've never been sure. There's a kind of peace here." Persephone studies the water. Peace, yes. But also nothingness. She says it softly, as if afraid to disturb the still surface. "I think I would prefer to remember, even if it hurt." He glances at her, his expression hard to read. And if remembering meant never feeling at rest? She meets his gaze. Then I would plant gardens in my mind, so I could walk somewhere living when the memories became too heavy. For a long moment, they just look at each other, as if the conversation has wandered far beyond the Lethe. A small, curious fact, in some late interpretations of the Persephone myth, the queen of the underworld could grant certain souls exemption from the waters of Lethe. This allowed them to keep their memories in the afterlife, a quiet act of rebellion against total forgetfulness. While not part of the earliest myths, it hints at the idea of Persephone as a preserver, not just a ruler. They turn back, retracing their steps, but Hades is unusually silent. When they reach the garden again, he pauses. "I have something to show you," he says. In the far corner, behind a row of skeletal trees, lies a low iron gate she's never noticed. He unlocks it with a key from his belt, and the hinges groan open. Inside is a small courtyard unlike the rest of the palace, a place of stone and shadow, but in the center stands a single pomegranate tree. Its branches twist like dark veins, and its fruit glows faintly in the dimness, each one the color of a burning ember. Persephone steps closer. "It's beautiful," she says, "and it's true, it is, in a way that feels both dangerous and irresistible. This tree," Hades says quietly, "is older than my reign. Older than the gates themselves. It blooms only for those who live here. And it bears fruit only for a queen." Something in his tone makes her heartbeat quicken, not in fear, but in the strange way of sensing that she is on the threshold of a choice that will not be undone. She doesn't reach for the fruit yet. Instead, she looks up at him. "Why are you showing me this now?" His answer is simple. "Because you've begun to plant things here. And I think you should know what's been waiting to grow." Persephone circles the tree slowly, her fingertips grazing the rough bark. It's warm beneath her touch, not the warmth of sunlight, but something deep and steady, as if the tree's heart beats in time with the underworld itself. The fruit gleams like drops of crystallized sunset, each one promising something unnamed. She can almost taste them just by looking, sweetness and sharpness tangled together. Hades watches her, motionless. There is no command in his gaze, only an odd patience. She thinks about what he said, it bears fruit only for a queen. A queen is not merely a title here. It's a tether, a declaration. She understands this now. To eat from this tree would be to bind herself, not in chains, but in roots. It would mean the seasons of her life would forever be split between two realms, above and below, bloom and shadow. And yet, hasn't she already begun? Every step she's taken here, the garden, the walks, the talks, has been a quiet weaving of threads between herself and this place. "Does it hurt?" she asks suddenly. "To eat it?" Hades' eyes soften, though his mouth stays serious. "Only if you try to pretend afterward that nothing has changed." Her lips curve faintly. "So it's honest fruit." That almost draws a smile from him. "Yes. Honest." She reaches up, but not to pluck anything. Instead, she cups one of the fruits gently, feeling its weight, its warmth. She wonders how long it's been here, waiting. A wind stirs, a rare thing in the underworld, and for a moment the courtyard smells faintly of something living, almost green. "I'll decide," she says finally, "when the time is right." And Hades nods, as if that answer pleases him more than an immediate choice. They leave the courtyard, and Persephone carries the image of the tree with her for the rest of the day. That night, she dreams, not of the tree, but of the surface world. She is in a field of barley, the wind rippling through the golden stalks. The air is thick with the scent of summer. She hears her mother's voice somewhere behind her, calling her name, but she does not turn. In the distance, At the edge of the field, she sees the faint glow of red fruit hanging in the dark. When she wakes, she finds herself wondering which direction she'd been walking in the dream, toward her mother's voice, or toward that glow. The following afternoon, Hades brings her somewhere new again. This time, it is not a solemn river or hidden courtyard, but a vast library carved directly into the stone walls of the palace. The shelves rise so high they disappear into shadow, each packed with scrolls, tablets, and strange objects sealed in glass cases. These are the memories of the dead, he explains. Every story they carried, recorded before they drank from Lethe. Not all chose to forget. Persephone trails her fingers along the spines of the scrolls. Do you read them? Sometimes. Mostly I keep them. She smiles faintly. A collector of lives. He inclines his head. And perhaps you will add to them one day. The thought sends a shiver through her, not of fear, but of the strange weight of imagining herself as part of the underworld's memory. She thinks again of the pomegranate tree. Of roots. Later, when she returns alone to the garden, she kneels by the patch of soil they planted together. She presses her ear lightly to the earth, as if listening for some secret beneath the surface. Perhaps all choices grow like seeds, unseen at first, taking shape slowly, invisibly, until one day you find yourself standing before the tree they've become. The days slip by in a rhythm she no longer tries to measure. Persephone wakes when the soft glow from the palace's lanterns grows pale, walks in the gardens, wanders the quiet halls, and sometimes sits in the library, rolling ancient words over her tongue. The air in the underworld always smells faintly of stone and cool metal, yet in certain corners, where moss creeps between the paving stones, there's an earthy sweetness that reminds her of rain on the surface. It is in one of these moss-sweet corridors that she finds Hades waiting for her. He is leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Walk with me," he says simply. They move through halls she's never seen before, narrow, with high arched ceilings and alcoves carved into the walls. Some hold statues so lifelike they seem about to breathe, others cradle strange artifacts, a lyre missing its strings, a helm of bronze so dark it's nearly black. At the end of the corridor, a great archway opens into a cavern filled with shimmering pillars of crystal. They grow straight out of the ground and hang from the ceiling like the frozen ribs of some colossal creature. Light moves within them, not torchlight, but something pale and ghost-like, shifting in soft waves. "What is this place?" she whispers. Hades looks around as though seeing it with new eyes. The Vault of Echoes. Echoes? They're remnants of voices. Words spoken by the dead that were too heavy to fade. The crystals hold them. Persephone moves closer, resting her palm against one of the smooth, cold surfaces. A faint murmur tickles her ear, not distinct enough to understand, but enough to feel. "Can you hear them?" "Yes," Hades replies. Though not all can. She turns her head toward him. "What do they say?" His eyes are shadowed. They say what the living never heard. The idea settles over her like a soft cloak, these pillars, holding confessions, farewells, truths spoken too late. She wonders if her mother's voice could ever find its way here, if the day came that Demeter entered these halls. She steps back, her fingers trailing away from the crystal. "It's beautiful. And sad." He inclines his head slightly. "Most beautiful things are." They walk between the pillars, their reflections stretched and warped in the glassy surfaces. Persephone's thoughts drift again to the pomegranate tree, its branches heavy, its fruit glowing like tiny suns. That evening, she dines alone in a small chamber. Hades has not joined her for the meal, but the servants have brought a plate of figs, cheese, and bread, along with a silver goblet of deep red wine. She finds herself swirling the liquid idly, watching the way the light catches it. It is almost the same shade as the fruit. Later, unable to sleep, she drapes a cloak over her shoulders and wanders into the garden. The pomegranate tree stands in its quiet courtyard, bathed in pale silver from the unseen moon above. The air smells faintly of the blossoms that cluster at the edges of the branches. She steps closer, tilting her head to study the fruit. Her fingers twitch, but she stops herself from touching it this time. A voice comes from behind her, not loud, but close. You keep visiting it. She doesn't turn immediately. It's hard to ignore. Hades steps beside her, his gaze fixed on the same fruit she is watching. That is how roots work. You don't notice them at first, but they are already binding you to the soil. And if I never eat? She asks. His expression is unreadable in the dim light. Then the tree will keep waiting. But so will I. They stand together in silence, the night holding its breath. Persephone feels a strange pull, not toward him, not toward the tree exactly, but toward something that is both of them and neither, a still point between two worlds. When she finally walks away, she does not look back. But she knows the tree is still there, and that she will return. Persephone dreams that night. She stands on the edge of a vast field, but it is neither spring nor autumn. The plants are green and gold all at once, their leaves trembling in a wind she cannot feel. In the distance, a line of shadow rolls across the ground like a tide, swallowing the color from the earth. She takes a step forward, but the soil beneath her turns suddenly black and hard, splitting into 1,000 cracks. From one of those cracks, a pomegranate seed sprouts. It grows impossibly fast, unfolding into a tree with roots that twist like the veins in a hand. She reaches for one of its fruits, but when her fingers brush the skin, it bursts open. The seeds scatter into the air like droplets of blood, and she hears, faintly, far away, the sound of her mother calling her name. Persephone wakes with a start. The sound is still in her ears. She rises before the lamps in the hall are fully lit, wandering again toward the inner gardens. The pomegranate tree stands in its usual place, but this time she notices something she has never seen before, a single fruit lying on the ground beneath it. Its skin is smooth, unblemished, and glistening faintly with dew. She crouches down, lifting it carefully. It feels heavier than she expects, as though something inside it is waiting. Her first thought is to leave it where it fell, to turn away and pretend she never touched it. But instead, she finds herself walking, slowly, deliberately, through the winding halls until she reaches a room she has never entered. It is small, with a single narrow window cut into the stone, letting in a shaft of pale light. Dust motes turn slowly in the air. She sits at the table in the center and sets the fruit before her. When she presses her fingers against it, the skin gives slightly, releasing a faint fragrance, sweet, sharp, and almost metallic. She closes her eyes and inhales deeply. A sound in the doorway makes her open them again. Hades stands there, silent. "You found it," he says, his voice low. "It was on the ground." Some things fall when they are meant to. She studies him, searching for any flicker of command or persuasion, but finds only a quiet watchfulness. "I could leave it," she says. "You could." He steps into the room, moving no closer than the opposite side of the table. "And the world above would wait for you." "And if I don't?" "Then this world would keep you." Her heart beats steadily, though she feels as though she is balanced at the edge of something immense. She thinks of her mother's fields, the warmth of the sun, the laughter of streams running free. She thinks of the crystal pillars in the vault of echoes, of the strange, heavy stillness of these halls, of the way Hades' voice has begun to sound less like a stranger's and more like something she has always known. She breaks the fruit open. The seeds gleam like drops of garnet. She lifts one to her lips. The taste bursts across her tongue, sweet, but edged with something darker, a flavor that lingers even after she swallows. She takes another, and another, the rhythm of it like a heartbeat. When she looks up, Hades is still watching her, but there is something different in his gaze now, less waiting, more knowing. She sets the fruit down, the seeds glistening where the light touches them. Her fingers are stained red. Now, he says, you are part of both worlds. And for the first time since her arrival, Persephone feels the weight of what that truly means. The air feels different after she eats the seeds. It is not just the taste that lingers, it is the way the halls seem to hum faintly under her feet, as if the stone itself has acknowledged her. Even the shadows seem to bend differently now, not retreating from her touch but curling toward it, as though she belongs to them as much as they belong to the walls. Persephone walks slowly back to the main corridors, her fingertips grazing the carved reliefs as she passes. The stories in the stone, warriors, rivers, storms, no longer seem like static images. She can feel them breathing beneath the surface. When she reaches the central hall, she finds Hades speaking with one of his stewards. He glances up at her approach, and in that brief meeting of eyes, she understands, a choice has been made, even if she does not yet know all its consequences. The steward bows and departs without a word. Hades gestures for her to follow. They walk together into the deeper vaults, passing chambers she has never been allowed to enter. Each door seems to open at their approach, without touch or key. Some lead to rooms of silence, others to vaults of treasure, gold that glows faintly without light, crowns of bone and bronze, urns sealed with wax so old it crumbles at the edges. Finally, they come to a staircase spiraling downward. The steps are cut from obsidian, reflecting distorted shards of their faces as they descend. The air grows cooler, denser, carrying the faint scent of earth after rain. At the base is a chamber unlike any she has seen before, neither throne room nor crypt. The walls are covered in shelves holding clay tablets and scrolls, each one sealed with a mark she cannot decipher. This, Hades says, is the Hall of Names. He walks among the shelves, brushing dust from a tablet here, a scroll there. Every soul who has ever passed into my realm is recorded here. Some I keep in the deep vaults, locked away until time itself forgets them. Others, he glances at her. Others are meant to be remembered. Persephone steps forward, drawn to one of the shelves. She picks up a scroll, turning it gently in her hands. The seal bears an intricate knot, neither fully floral nor purely geometric. "May I?" she asks. He nods. When she breaks the seal, the scroll unfurls easily, the ink still dark despite its age. She recognizes some of the script, names she has heard in stories above, but many are unfamiliar, written in a language that coils like vines across the parchment. Her finger stops on one line. The name there feels warm, somehow, as though it has been waiting for her. She doesn't speak it aloud, but in her mind, it rings clear. Hades watches her closely. "That one," he says quietly, "is not yet here. But it will be." She looks at him sharply. "How can you know?" His eyes, dark as the obsidian stare, hold hers. "Because some threads are woven long before they touch the loom." A shiver passes through her, not fear, but the awareness that the ground beneath her life is shifting in ways she cannot yet see. As they leave the Hall of Names, Persephone feels the pomegranate's taste return to her mouth, sharper now, almost electric. She wonders if she will ever be able to forget it, or if it will follow her, even in dreams. By the time they return to the higher halls, the lamps are lit, their flames flickering gold in the shadows. Hades pauses at the threshold to the garden. Spring will come again, he says. She nods, though the thought feels distant. And when it does, you will have to choose which world you call home. But she knows, even now, that the choice will never be so simple. Spring does come, though it arrives more quietly than she remembers. It is not the sudden riot of color and warmth she once felt in her mother's groves. Instead, it creeps in at the edges of the underworld, a subtle loosening of the air, a faint scent of green where before there was only stone and shadow. The garden Hades keeps, with its pale blossoms and black leaf vines, stirs as though it too feels the turning of the year. Persephone finds herself walking there often now. She brushes her hands over petals so soft they almost dissolve at her touch. She kneels beside the still ponds where the water reflects not her face, but shifting scenes of the world above, meadows just beginning to blush with wildflowers, the faint silver of meltwater rushing down mountainsides. The sight of it stirs something in her, longing, yes, but also a strange sense of distance. She remembers the sun on her skin, the wind carrying the scent of wheat and apple blossom, but the memory feels like it belongs to someone else. It is on one of these walks that Hermes arrives. She hears him before she sees him, the sound of winged sandals touching the flagstones, light as a bird's landing. Your mother waits, he says, stepping into the garden with that half smile he always wears, the one that never quite reaches his eyes. She counts the days. I told her you'd be ready. Persephone stands, smoothing the folds of her gown. And what did Hades tell you? Hermes shrugs. That bargains are bargains. That he keeps his word. They both glance toward the colonnade, where Hades stands in the shadow between two pillars, watching. He says nothing, but the weight of his gaze follows her as she walks toward him. When she reaches him, he does not take her hand. He simply says, when the year turns again, you will return. She wants to answer, wants to ask if he is certain, if the seeds she ate truly bind her so, but instead she only nods. Something in her already knows that no matter what she says, the pomegranate has made its own kind of promise. The journey upward is longer than she expects. Hermes leads her through winding halls and hidden gates, each one opening into a lighter air. The shadows grow thinner, the stone less cold. By the time they reach the final threshold, the air is filled with the sound of living water, rushing and bright. Then, with one step, the underworld falls away, and she is standing in a meadow washed with sunlight. Her eyes sting. She blinks against the brilliance of it, the gold spilling over the hills, the deep blue of the sky. Grass bends under the wind, whispering against her legs. She can hear insects humming, the distant call of a lark. And then she hears her mother. Demeter's voice is not gentle when she speaks her name. It is sharp, breaking on the air like a sudden storm. Persephone turns and sees her striding across the field, skirts brushing the grass, eyes fierce with something between joy and grief. When Demeter reaches her, the embrace is crushing, almost painful. Persephone feels the ache of it deep in her ribs, but she does not pull away. The scent of wheat, of crushed herbs, clings to her mother's hair, and for a moment it is as if no time has passed at all. But Demeter's next words shatter that illusion. You will never go back there. Persephone does not answer. She looks past her mother's shoulder toward the far horizon, where the air seems to shimmer faintly. She can almost imagine the gates still standing there, hidden from mortal sight, waiting for her. The pomegranate's taste is still on her tongue. And she knows, even now, that she will return. The days above are long and golden. At first, Persephone moves through them like someone waking from a dream. Every sound is too sharp, every color too vivid, the green of leaves almost painful to look at, the blue of the sky impossibly deep. Even the air feels heavy with scents, earth, grass, wildflowers, and the faint sweetness of ripening fruit. Demeter shadows her everywhere, as if afraid she might vanish the moment she looks away. Her mother's joy is fierce, but so is her watchfulness. There is always an arm around Persephone's shoulder, a hand guiding hers as they tend the fields together. She teaches her the turning of the plow, the rhythm of sowing seed, the quiet patience of watching sprouts break through soil. And yet, despite her mother's care, Persephone finds herself listening for sounds that do not belong here, the slow echo of footsteps in a marble hall, the distant rush of the Styx, the faint music of unseen lyres drifting through the underworld's air. Sometimes, when she bends to gather herbs, she catches the glint of something red among the green. Not berries, not fruit, nothing she can touch. Just the memory of pomegranate seeds gleaming in the half-light. One afternoon, Demeter catches her staring at the horizon. "You're thinking of him," her mother says flatly. Persephone does not deny it. "I'm thinking of where I belong." "You belong here." The words come quick, sharp as a blade. "You were stolen from me. You think you made a choice, but you were deceived." "Perhaps," Persephone says softly. "And yet, the underworld is not only darkness." Demeter's face hardens. "It has taken enough from me. It will take no more." But in the days that follow, Persephone notices the sky begin to change. The sun hangs lower. The warmth lingers less in the evenings. Leaves at the edges of the grove start to curl, their green giving way to gold. The turning of the year is subtle, but she feels it deep in her bones. Each shortening day hums with a quiet tension. She begins to dream at night, not of the meadows and fields, but of cool stone halls and the weight of shadowed air. She dreams of a voice that says her name without raising its tone, yet fills the space between heartbeats. She dreams of a promise. When the first frost dusts the grass, she knows the time has come. She finds Demeter in the fields, bent over a row of winter wheat, and kneels beside her. "Mother," she says, "the year has turned." Demeter's hand still in the soil. Her shoulders tense, but she does not look up. "You do not have to go." Persephone touches her mother's hand gently. "You know I must." For a long moment, Demeter is silent. Then she draws her daughter close, holding her as though she can press her warmth into Persephone's very bones. "I will make the earth sleep until you return," she murmurs. "Let it hunger for you as I do." And when Persephone steps away, she can feel the frost under her bare feet, the air growing sharper with each breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, she imagines the gates waiting, open, patient, inevitable. The pomegranate's taste rises again on her tongue, sweet and strange. She smiles. And she walks toward winter. You're invited to a tea that is technically diplomatic and emotionally domestic all at once, the kind of meeting where treaties are signed with teaspoons and grudges are cleared with biscuits. The setting is deliberately unglamorous, a small porch tucked between two wings of the palace that both parties have agreed reads as neutral ground. Ivy climbs the colonnade in careful lines, trying very hard to be a hedge. A low wooden table is set with clay cups, a steaming pot of herbal tea, a small saucer of honey, and a plate of warm bread that smells faintly of hearth smoke and good intentions. You arrive as the principals take their seats. Demeter looks as if she grew out of the earth itself, robes the color of newly turned soil, fingers dusted with seed husks, a casual crown of wheat tucked into her hair. She moves with the slow, economical grace of someone who has coaxed result after reluctant result from the land. Even her pauses feel deliberate. Hades is precise and tidy, the kind of figure whose calm is built from ledgers rather than lyric. His papers are stacked in neat piles nearby. His cup sits perfectly centered on its saucer as if its alignment will reassure him that calendars can be controlled. Persephone sits between them, the diplomatic dessert, and the living scene that holds the meeting together. She places a small dish of pomegranate seeds on the table, part symbolism, part snack, and folds her hands as if she is both a daughter and an intern for this particular round of negotiations. The scene is less tribunal and more kitchen table. Months are counted, obligations allocated, and the sort of small, unromantic compromises that keep fields fed are discussed. It is, in short, domestic diplomacy, and you find yourself strangely soothed by the ordinariness of it. A grounding fact, Demeter is the ancient Greek goddess of agriculture, and Persephone's descent and return were traditional mythic explanations for the seasonal cycle. The Eleusinian mysteries, rites in their honor, were among the major religious observances in classical Greece associated with planting and harvest. Historians still argue whether those rites were primarily initiatory spiritual experiences, civic festivals that bound communities together, or formalized agricultural instruction, and that debate changes how we read myths as either metaphor, civic practice, or preserved ritual. Demeter opens with business in the way a foreman opens a meeting, direct and unadorned. She sets a honey cake in front of Hades and says, without ritual flourish, we need terms. Hades, who prefers lists to speeches, unrolls a parchment and points to a grid. Months. Duties. Contingencies. The language is municipal, not melodramatic. Which months does the surface require Persephone's presence for sowing and harvest festivals? How are emergency grain stores to be shared? What rituals require cross-border attendance? And which shrine offerings must be maintained at each gate to keep local customs intact? Persephone speaks calmly and practically. She suggests a clear division of time, a modest allowance of pomegranate seeds for both ritual and snacking, and a schedule that minimizes the sort of last-minute divine commuting that ends in burnt offerings. She requests a small plot near the northern gate where Demeter's attendants may conduct seasonal rites provided the roots are contained and compost is carefully tended. Demeter checks the idea as if testing a sapling's root structure and asks precise questions about drainage and water access. Which stewards will manage runoff, she asks, and the conversation moves into the pleasing minutiae of irrigation. They address couriers. Hermes, fleet and persuasive, is the obvious messenger, but Demeter notes that Hermes' schedule is, well, Hermesian, gloriously unreliable when other business calls. The practical solution is a roster, Hermes as primary, river god who understands tide and timing as backup, and an underworld steward trained in the ritually appropriate way to carry shrine wreaths. There is a brief squabble about whether Cerberus should be listed as an official escort. Demeter finds him unnerving. Hades insists he is a steady companion, and one of Cerberus' heads pokes up from under the porch to inspect a crust of bread. You smile because the image of a three-headed dog snacking politely under a diplomatic table is exactly the kind of small domesticity these myths rarely allow. Persephone reads a petition aloud. A group of shades requests a brief allowance of daylight or simulated warmth during particular festivals, so the smell of bread and the sound of music do not slip entirely into forgetfulness. Demeter asks gently, why would the dead prefer such things? Persephone answers simply, because memory is communal. The smell of bread and the tune of a flute keep people anchored to what they were. Historians still argue whether such ritual practices began as local customs later absorbed into Panhellenic cults or whether they were formal obligations from the start, but the plea itself is practical and moving. A fringe anecdote surfaces and softens the tone. A village nymph once swore Demeter disguised herself as a baker to test generosity, handing out loaves and noting who returned with a cup of milk. Demeter does not deny it. She smiles in a way that makes the story feel plausibly true. Hades pretends scandalized disbelief, then reaches for a honey cake anyway, admitting privately, this is the small humanizing moment you watch for, that surprises can teach more than decrees. They negotiate specifics, limits on daylight allowances, the steward roster, what counts as an acceptable offering at each shrine, contingency plans if a blight sweeps a region, and a modest mutual aid clause establishing grain convoys in emergencies with repayment terms designed to reverse famine rather than trap neighbors. The language turns instrumental and municipal in a way that delights you. Maps are consulted, names go on lists, contingencies are numbered. It reads like good governance, boring to dramatists, essential to the people who will eat the bread. Small formalities reveal character. Demeter insists that wreaths for river festivals avoid leafy reed because forgetting, she says, has its place but should not be woven into a family garland. Hades suggests a registry of approved wreath makers to prevent accidents. Persephone suggests a bake-off to decide the first entries into the registry instead. The idea of a bake-off to settle ritual disputes seems comic until you realize how often practical civic life is settled by mundane pleasures. Who bakes best and who returns what they borrow are the true civic tests. There are tiny domestic gestures that mean more than protocol. At one point Hades, concentrating on his lists, misjudges the tea and splashes a little when he pours. Demeter pats his hand with amused reproach like a mentor chastising an apprentice. Later, when they consult a carved map of river routes and underworld channels, Demeter traces her finger to name villages and Hades marks tributaries he has monitored for centuries. The overlap of their knowledge is a quiet, mutual safeguard against famine. The meeting closes with a small but vital stipulation. Hades will permit a limited grove near the gate tended jointly by both houses, provided irrigation is strictly managed. Demeter will dispatch grain in emergency with agreed contingencies for restitution. Persephone's visits above and below will be scheduled and respected with minimal diplomatic wrangling. The terms will be formalized by stewards, signatures, and stable messengers, paper and process, which is to say the things that actually keep communities alive. When they stand, Demeter fixes Hades with a look that is more maternal than martial. "You treat my daughter well," she says plainly, and the phrase functions as a bond rather than a threat. Hades answers softly but firmly, "I tend what I have." She tends what she loves. We tend to each other. It is not an epic line, and it need not be. It is steady and domestic and therefore, in its own way, indestructible. You leave the porch with bread and honey on your mind, with the relief that comes from seeing complicated things organized into lists and contingencies. No poets will likely make an altar carved with this afternoon's conversation, no sculptors will chisel it into a temple frieze, but the people who plant and bake and feed will feel the difference. In a world that expects storms and spectacle, the small, bureaucratic acts of care, made over tea and warm bread, are the kind of lasting magic that keeps the seasons honest. You linger by the edge of the meadow, the air warm but not oppressive, a kind of temperature that feels like the world has decided to stay at its most comfortable setting for just a few more minutes before reality notices. The grass around your ankles sways in a half-hearted breeze, and you notice the first tiny wildflowers that have dared to bloom here. They look almost embarrassed, as if they've arrived to a party far too early and aren't quite sure what to do with themselves. You crouch down, fingers brushing one delicate stem, and you remember that Persephone's return each year is supposed to be the grand sign that spring has truly arrived. This doesn't feel grand yet. You straighten, glance back at Persephone. She's not moving quickly. In fact, she's trailing her fingertips through the heads of tall grain, walking as if she has nowhere to be. You're almost sure you hear her hum something under her breath. It's not a hymn you recognize, not one of those stiff ceremonial numbers that priests insist on, but something gentler, looser, the kind of melody you make up when you think no one's listening. You've read, somewhere, that in ancient Eleusis, worshippers of Demeter and Persephone took part in secretive rites every autumn. The details have been kept under wraps for over 2,000 years, partly because initiates swore an oath of silence and partly because historians still argue whether those rites were meant to reveal cosmic truths or simply help you cope with the changing seasons. Standing here, watching Persephone walk so slowly back toward her mother's world, you think maybe both explanations work just fine. The sun edges higher. A bird, something small, brown, and clearly too confident for its size, hops close enough that you almost step on it. Persephone notices too and tilts her head at it, smiling faintly. There's a softness in her face that wasn't there in the underworld. Not joy exactly, but a loosening, like she's untied a knot in her chest and isn't sure if she wants to tie it again later. You keep walking. The path now turns into a stretch of dusty road, the kind that reminds you why sandals were both a blessing and a curse in the ancient world. The dust puffs up with each step, coating your feet in pale grit. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a quirky fact. In some parts of the Mediterranean, people used to believe that sweeping your doorstep at the wrong hour could invite unwanted spirits. You wonder what they'd think about trudging an entire dusty road alongside the queen of the underworld. Probably not something the average villager would add to their to-do list. The road passes between low stone walls, half collapsed in places, overgrown with weeds. This is old farmland. You can almost hear the echo of sickles slicing through stalks, the creak of wooden carts, the low murmur of neighbors comparing harvest yields. A reminder that while gods and goddesses are busy with their arrangements, the mortals down here just keep planting and reaping, year after year. Persephone doesn't speak much, but when she does, her words have a way of making you stop and think. She glances at a crumbling olive tree, its bark furrowed and pale, and says, "They live a long time, you know. But not forever." You wonder if she's talking about the tree or herself. Or maybe both. A little farther on, the landscape changes again. You smell it before you see it, the tang of sea air. Salt, kelp, the faintest trace of fish that have been drying in the sun somewhere far off. When the road finally rises and you catch a glimpse of the shoreline, you realize you've been craving this sight without knowing it. The waves aren't wild, just steady, curling in like they've been doing since before humans knew how to write about them. Persephone pauses on the rise. She doesn't run toward the water, doesn't gasp or stretch her arms to the sky. She just stands, watching, the wind pulling a strand of her dark hair across her cheek. "This is where I first met him," she says, almost absently. You don't need to ask who she means. It's not a story she tells like an epic. There's no heroic background music. Just this simple fact, she was here once, and then everything in her life changed. Historians still argue whether the myth of Hades and Persephone was originally a tale about seasonal cycles, a coded agricultural lesson, or a commentary on arranged marriages. You think maybe it's all of those things and something else entirely, a story about how even the gods don't get exactly what they want, but they make do. You walk together down toward the shore, the sand unexpectedly cool underfoot. The tide has left behind a scatter of shells, some chipped, some whole, each one carrying the echo of the deep. You pick one up, hold it to your ear. It's supposed to sound like the ocean, though you've always thought it sounds more like a whisper that isn't quite meant for you. Persephone watches you do this, and for the first time today, she laughs. Not loud, but warm enough to make you feel like you've done something worthwhile. The two of you sit for a while, not talking much, just letting the waves fill the silence. Eventually, the sun dips a little lower, and Persephone stands. "We should go," she says, but she doesn't sound like she's in a hurry. So you leave the shoreline behind, the sand clinging stubbornly to your feet. The path bends inland again, leading toward hills where the grass grows high and the wind sings through it. Somewhere ahead, Demeter is waiting, the seasons shifting like clockwork years to make room for her daughter's return. And you walk on, the dust and salt still clinging to you, carrying the strange calm of the day like a secret you're not ready to share. The hills ahead rise gently, like they've been smoothed by centuries of footsteps, flocks, and winds. You notice the way the grass shifts color in layers. Close to you it's a fresh, young green, but farther up it deepens into something almost blue, and on the crest, where the wind strips away the moisture, it fades into a pale gold. The sky has that late afternoon clarity where everything seems sharper, but also more fragile, as though the light might break if you touched it. Persephone walks a little ahead now, her steps steady but unhurried. The edge of her garment catches the wind and flutters, and the sound is almost like a sail snapping against its mast. You realize it's been hours since you saw anyone else on this road. Not a cart, not a shepherd, not even a stray goat. Just the two of you, threading your way through the long shadows of the hills. Somewhere in the grass, you hear the faint metallic clicking of grasshoppers, or maybe cicadas, though they usually prefer the height of summer. You can't tell. The sound blurs into the rustling wind until you stop trying to separate them. The earth smells sun-warmed and dry, with an undertone of something sweet, maybe wild thyme crushed underfoot. Halfway up the first slope, Persephone slows and gestures toward a flat, dark patch of ground. "Fire," she says, as if it's a complete sentence. You crouch to look. The earth here is blackened, with shards of pottery half buried in the soil. A cooking fire, maybe? Or a signal fire? You think about how many generations must have lit flames along this route, some to cook food, some to ward off beasts, some to send messages through the night. Each fire a small circle of safety in the great, dark countryside. There's an odd comfort in that, the thought that in any age, no matter how different, people have always huddled around light to make the darkness less absolute. You glance at Persephone, wondering whether the queen of the underworld feels any kinship with such small flames. But she's already walking again. You crest the hill, and the view on the other side makes you stop for a breath. The valley below is cut by a silver ribbon of river, winding its way between groves of olive and cypress. Tiny birds will over the water in loose, playful arcs, dipping down to catch insects. To the left, you see a crumbling bridge, a squat, practical structure of stone blocks, arched just high enough to keep the spring floods from sweeping it away. Persephone stands beside you, following the line of the river with her eyes. "It's always changing," she says softly. "Even when it looks the same." You know she's right. Rivers shift their beds over time, eat away at one bank and build up another. But part of you hears something else in her words, a reminder that you can walk the same road every year, and yet it's never truly the same road. The descent into the valley is steeper than it looked. Loose stones roll under your sandals, and you catch yourself more than once, arms flailing in an undignified way. Persephone notices but doesn't comment, though you catch the faintest flicker of amusement in her eyes. The road curves near the riverbank, shaded now by plane trees with broad, green leaves that flicker silver when the wind shifts them. You stop by the water. It's clear enough that you can see the smooth pebbles at the bottom, their colors muted and blurred by the slow current. You kneel and cup your hands into the flow. The water is shockingly cold, so cold that it makes your fingers ache almost immediately. It's delicious, though, and you drink greedily, feeling the dust of the road wash away from your throat. Persephone crouches nearby, trailing one hand in the current. She doesn't drink, just watches the water curl and twist around her fingers. On the far bank, you spot a cluster of low stone walls, the ghost of a settlement, maybe. No roofs, no doors, just lines of stacked rock marking where rooms once stood. You imagine the voices that might have filled them, children's shouts, the scrape of a knife on wood, the thump of a millstone. Did they leave slowly, over years, as people drifted away? Or was it all abandoned at once, a sudden silence? The path crosses the bridge, and you follow Persephone into the olive groves. Here the air feels thicker, warmer, and you can smell the faint bitterness of the tree's leaves. The ground is littered with fallen olives, some shriveled, some crushed into dark stains in the dirt. You remember reading once that ancient farmers sometimes left part of their crop for the poor to collect. Maybe that's what this scattering is, a quiet generosity. Or maybe it's just windfall, not worth the trouble to gather. The light changes as the sun sinks lower, filtering through the leaves in broken gold patterns. Persephone's shadow stretches long and thin, tangling with yours on the path until it's impossible to tell which belongs to whom. Somewhere far off, you hear the bleating of sheep, carried on the wind like a half-forgotten song. You walk until the grove thins and the land opens again. Ahead is another rise, this one topped with a ring of standing stones. They're not monumental, no towering monoliths, but still deliberate, each one placed with care. The stones are weathered, pitted with lichen, and half buried in the soil. You can't tell if they were meant as a boundary, a shrine, or something else entirely. Persephone stops just inside the circle, her expression unreadable. "This place remembers," she says at last. Her voice is quiet, almost reverent. You think about how stones hold heat from the sun, how they outlast wood and flesh and even the shape of rivers. If the earth has memory, maybe it's written in stones like these. For a moment, the wind drops. The silence is so complete that you can hear the faint rustle of your own clothes, the slow rhythm of your breathing. You feel the weight of time here, not heavy, exactly, but insistent. Like the gentle press of a hand on your shoulder, reminding you that you are just passing through. When the wind returns, Persephone steps out of the ring without looking back. You follow, glancing once over your shoulder as the stones shrink behind you. The road dips again toward another grove, and beyond that, a faint glimmer you think might be the first lanterns of a distant village. The thought of other people, of food and firelight, sends a small, warm pulse through you. But for now, you keep walking in the dimming light, with Persephone a few paces ahead, her presence both grounding and strange. The sun is almost gone when you hear the first owl, a soft, questioning note that seems to hover in the air long after it fades. Persephone tilts her head toward the sound, and for a moment, she looks entirely at home in this twilight world, as though the line between above and below has blurred in the fading light. And you walk on. You linger at the edge of the meadow, boots sinking ever so slightly into the thaw-softened ground, as if the earth itself is breathing out a long sigh after the stiffness of winter. The air smells different now, less of dry bark and brittle stems, more of damp moss and the shy beginnings of green. You can feel it on your skin, that faint mistiness that clings to your hair and makes your fingertips feel alive again. Somewhere behind you, a crow complains loudly about something you'll never understand, and you find yourself smirking. Nature's soundtrack has a sense of humor. The seasons are shifting, and with them, the rhythm of Persephone's days above ground. She walks a little slower now when she visits the olive groves, her fingers brushing the silver-green leaves as if she's taking inventory of every texture she will miss. You notice her lingering in the sunlight too, standing in that lazy, unhurried way that people do when they're trying to memorize the warmth. It's subtle, but you can tell, she's counting down without really admitting it. The fields are waking up around you. Farmers in the distance coax oxen into furrows, their wooden plows creaking like old knees. It's the same as it's been for thousands of years, except, of course, the technology has changed, but the human desire to wrestle life from the ground is constant. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greek plow design was borrowed from Egypt or developed independently, but honestly, standing here, you care less about the answer and more about the rhythmic scrape and push of the blades through earth. It's hypnotic, almost like a lullaby for the land. You walk with Persephone through one of the small villages, where the first wildflowers of the season are being tucked into clay vases outside doorways. A group of children is playing some chaotic game that seems to involve chasing each other with bundles of reeds. One trips, falls, and pops back up with the resilience only the very young and very mud-covered seem to possess. Persephone laughs softly, and you catch it, just a note of wistfulness in the sound. She knows that soon she'll be hearing laughter only in memory. Somewhere along the road, you pass an old woman selling pomegranate seeds in little woven baskets. She looks at Persephone with that knowing glance that older people sometimes give, the one that says, "I know more than I'm saying." You can't help but wonder if she's guessing at the truth, if she sees the faint underworld shadow in Persephone's eyes. In ancient times, pomegranates were more than just fruit, they were symbols, contracts, whispers of another place. You think about the oddness of carrying both the sweetness and the binding in one fragile, jewel-red seed. The day stretches long, in that pre-spring way where the light feels like it's making up for lost time. You and Persephone wander up a hillside where the grass is still patchy from snow, and from there, the view opens wide. Below, you can see fields, rooftops, the shimmer of a river threading through it all. Somewhere to the south, faint and distant, is the darker line of the forest where you first followed her months ago. The wind at this height has teeth, but it's a friendly kind of bite. It wakes you, it sharpens your senses. Persephone stands with her face turned toward the horizon. She doesn't speak for a long while, and you don't either. There's a certain companionship in silence, especially when you know that the moments are numbered. You wonder what she's thinking, whether she's counting the days until she leaves or trying not to count at all. Maybe both. People are complicated that way. Even gods are. On the way back down, you notice the way the shadows lengthen faster now, how the evening pulls in early despite the warmer air. The village lights blink on one by one, little beacons against the dusky blue. There's a heaviness to the walk, not because your feet are tired, but because every step feels like a bead sliding along a string, and you know the end of it is approaching. That night, you sit outside by the hearth, watching sparks twist into the cool air. Persephone is quiet again, sipping something herbal and fragrant from a clay cup. The firelight paints gold along her cheekbones, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine her like this in the underworld, bringing warmth to stone corridors, laughter to shadowed halls. It's a strangely comforting thought, even if it's bittersweet. As you lean back, the stars spread overhead like a scatter of spilled salt. Somewhere among them are the stories humans have told for centuries, heroes, monsters, lovers, and bargains struck in the dark. You think of all the versions of Persephone's story that have been told, and how you are living a quieter, less dramatic one. No grand abductions, no violent rescues, just the slow, steady ticking of time and the tender ache of knowing what's coming. The night deepens, and with it, the sense that the wheel of the year is turning under your feet. Soon, the flowers will be in full bloom, and then they will fade. The same way the moon swells and shrinks, the same way tides breathe in and out. You close your eyes for a moment and let yourself drift into that rhythm, knowing it will carry you forward whether you're ready or not. Morning breaks without fanfare, just the soft, pearly light of a sun that's not yet fully committed to rising. You stir before the first rooster call, drawn out of sleep by the faint smell of dew-wet grass and the distant clink of metal on stone. Somewhere in the village, a blacksmith is already at work, shaping the day with every hammer strike. The sound seems to roll lazily across the fields, carried by a wind that still remembers winter. Persephone is already awake, seated on a low stone wall outside the dwelling. She's weeding something, thin reeds, supple and pale, sliding between her fingers like ribbons of river water. At first you think it's a basket, but then you notice the pattern, tight, intricate, deliberate. It's a garland. She's been making them almost every day now, as though she's trying to leave behind little circles of sunlight for when she's gone. A few already hang from doorways and fence posts in the village, their petals just beginning to fade. You wonder if the villagers will keep them long after she's returned to the underworld, or if they'll be quietly replaced when the next festival comes. You walk together toward the far fields, where the soil is soft enough to turn. Farmers are bent over, planting the first rows of barley and chickpeas. The smell of freshly cut earth is rich, almost edible, and you think about how, in ancient times, this moment would have been an act of hope as much as necessity. No seed was just a seed, it was a wager on the gods' favor, on the weather's kindness, on the unseen future. Persephone stops now and then to press her palm flat against the ground, as though listening for something beneath it. You suspect she's not just feeling for roots or moisture, she's listening for her mother. Demeter's presence is stronger here in the fields, in the scent of wild thyme and the hum of bees that have only just woken from their winter slumber. If there's a way to carry that warmth back to the shadowed halls below, Persephone will find it. The walk takes you through the olive grove where you've passed so many afternoons. Today, the leaves whisper more urgently, tossing silver flashes into the sunlight as the wind stirs them. You imagine they're saying goodbye, though that's a thought you keep to yourself. There's something about farewells, speak them aloud too soon and they settle on the air like dust. At the grove's edge, a small group of women is preparing dye vats, the bright smell of crushed madder root cutting through the softer scents of grass and blossom. Their hands are stained crimson to the wrists, and their laughter carries across the rows of trees. You notice Persephone pause, watching them with a fondness that is almost longing. In another life, perhaps she might have stood among them, dyeing wool under the open sky instead of ruling in a realm lit by ghost light. By midday, the sun has taken on that mellow strength that encourages stillness. You and Persephone find a shaded rise above the village and sit in the tall grass, watching life unfold below like a tapestry. Shepherds guide their flocks along narrow tracks, traders argue cheerfully over the price of figs, and children trail each other in long, zigzagging games that make no sense to anyone over the age of 10. It's all so ordinary, and maybe that's why it feels precious. Persephone breaks the quiet first. "It's always the little things I miss," she says, picking a blade of grass and twirling it between her fingers. "Not the grand views, or the festivals, or the harvest feasts. Just the sound of bees. The smell of bread baking before dawn. The way sunlight looks when it filters through olive leaves." She glances at you briefly, her mouth curving into a smile that's equal parts warmth and ache. "You'll remember those things for me, won't you?" You promise you will, though you know memory is a slippery creature, it fades when you try to hold it too tightly. Still, you'll try. That's all anyone can do. As the afternoon leans toward evening, you walk back slowly, your shadows stretching long across the path. The smell of baking bread drifts from the village, mingling with the sharper scent of wood smoke. Somewhere, someone begins to play a reed flute, the notes thin and sweet as a stream's first trickle after snowmelt. The music follows you almost all the way home. That night, the stars come out in stubborn clusters, bright even against a moon nearly full. Persephone sits by the fire again, weaving yet another garland, this one with small white blossoms that catch the firelight like sparks. You watch her fingers move, steady, patient, unhurried. She doesn't say it, but you can feel it in the air. There aren't many evenings like this left. You stay awake longer than usual, as if refusing to close your eyes might somehow stall the turning of the seasons. But the night is a tide, and it moves regardless of who is watching. Eventually, you drift into sleep to the rhythm of the fire's crackle and the faint sound of weaving, thread over thread, until the pattern is whole. The morning begins not with sound, but with light, the kind that slips in gently, creeping between shutters and over thresholds, washing the room in pale gold. You wake to find the fire has long gone out, leaving only the faint, woody scent of last night's embers. For a moment you simply lie still, listening to the quiet, the rustle of wind through thatch, the faint scuffle of chickens somewhere beyond the walls, the muted heartbeat of a village already awake. Persephone is gone from the room, though her garland from last night rests on the low table, a crown of tiny white blossoms, still damp with dew. You trace a finger over the petals, surprised at how cool they feel. Outside, the air is brisk, smelling faintly of rosemary and the salt of the distant sea. You follow the narrow path toward the central well, where a small group of villagers is gathered, their voices low but warm. You find her there, leaning lightly against the well's stone lip, her hair pulled back with a strip of woven flax. In the early light, she doesn't look like a queen at all, more like any other woman here, waiting her turn to draw water. And yet, the space around her feels subtly different, as if the air itself knows it's in the presence of someone the seasons obey. She greets you with a faint smile, passing you a clay cup filled to the brim. The water is shockingly cold, as if it still remembers its journey through the deep rock. The day's work begins in the orchards. The trees here are older than most of the houses, gnarled and bent from decades of wind and sun, yet still stubbornly productive. Villagers move among them with baskets, checking for early blooms, trimming stray branches, and setting out shallow dishes of water to keep the bees content. You watch Persephone linger beneath one particularly ancient fig tree, her hand resting against its trunk. She closes her eyes, breathing as though the tree is telling her something in a language older than words. Around midday, the wind shifts, carrying with it the fragrance of thyme from the hills. A shepherd passes with his flock, bells chiming in uneven rhythm. One of the lambs breaks away to nose at Persephone's garland, and she laughs, a sound so bright it seems to warm the very air. The shepherd offers to trade cheese for fresh bread later, and you both agree without hesitation. After the orchards, you follow a footpath toward the terraced gardens. Here, rows of herbs cascade down the slope like living green ribbons, sage, oregano, mint, and others you can't quite name. The women tending them move with practiced ease, snipping sprigs and tucking them into woven pouches. They press a few bundles into Persephone's hands, for luck, though you suspect they know exactly who she is and that their gift is more than mere superstition. By late afternoon, clouds gather low over the hills, darkening the edges of the horizon. Rain is rare this early in the season, but the air carries that unmistakable heaviness. Villagers quicken their pace, bringing tools inside, herding animals into shelter. You and Persephone walk back toward the dwelling, the wind tugging at your clothes, the sky bruising into shades of indigo and slate. When the rain comes, it comes all at once, fat, warm drops that patter against the roof and hiss into the hearth fire. The two of you sit close, watching the storm through the open doorway. Water rushes along the village paths, carving temporary streams between the stones. Somewhere, a child squeals in delight, splashing barefoot in the puddles before a sharp voice calls them inside. Persephone rests her chin on her knees, eyes tracking the rivulets that snake their way down the packed earth slope beyond the threshold. In the underworld, she says quietly, rain has no scent. You glance at her, and she's still watching the water. It falls sometimes, but it's empty. Just a thing that happens. Here, it smells of earth and leaves and everything that's alive. The rain tapers by nightfall, leaving the world hushed and freshly washed. Lanterns glow in doorways, casting small pools of gold into the wet darkness. From somewhere in the village comes the smell of baking bread mixed with the sharper tang of sheep's cheese, no doubt the promised trade from earlier. You share it later by the fire, the bread still steaming, the cheese creamy and sharp on the tongue. As the night deepens, the fire's glow softens, and the sound of the village fades into nothing more than the faint drip of rain from the eaves. Persephone leans back against the wall, eyes half closed, the garland of white blossoms now resting beside her. You wonder if she's counting the days left, or if she's simply letting them pass without measure, as if refusing to acknowledge their dwindling number might make them last longer. You don't ask. Some things are better left to the quiet. Morning returns not with sunlight but with the deep, velvet gray of a lingering mist. You wake to the muted sound of dripping water, each drop landing somewhere unseen, on leaves, on stone, on the earth itself. The air inside the room feels heavier than usual, scented with damp clay and the faint sweetness of the herbs hanging from the beams. The fire has burned down to the thinnest coil of smoke, which slips toward the door as though eager to join the fog outside. When you step beyond the threshold, the world seems wrapped in wool. The mountains are gone, erased behind a veil of soft white, and even the nearest houses look as though they've been drawn in faded charcoal. Sound is different here, closer, somehow, as though the mist swallows distance and keeps everything secret. The villagers move slowly, shapes in the haze, their voices low but calm, like people who know this weather well. You find Persephone by the goat pens, her hair damp, beads of moisture clinging to her lashes. She's feeding the animals handfuls of hay, her fingers brushing the damp coats of the nannies as they chew. The earth likes this, she says when she notices you watching. Mist is like a promise, it keeps the soil from forgetting the rain. You're not sure if she means it literally or as something else entirely. Breakfast is simple today, thick slices of yesterday's bread, toasted over the rekindled fire, spread with a dark, sharp-tasting honey from the hives on the hillside. You eat in companionable silence while the mist presses against the open doorway, so thick it could be touched if you reached far enough. Later, the two of you set out toward the river. The path feels changed underfoot, soft and springy from the rain, and the wildflowers along its edge bend under the weight of dew. Tiny spider webs stretch between low branches, each one beaded with silver droplets that catch what little light seeps through. Persephone pauses often, crouching to examine some plant or stone, touching the world as though reacquainting herself with every detail. The river is different too. The rain has fattened it, turning the usual clear trickle into a wide, rippling band of pale green. On its banks, willows trail their long fingers in the water, and the scent here is rich, mud, moss, and something faintly metallic. Persephone kneels at the edge, letting the current run over her hands. She closes her eyes, and for a heartbeat you wonder if she's listening to it or speaking to it in some inaudible way. A fisherman appears from the mist upriver, a basket of silver-scaled fish hanging from his shoulder. He greets you both with an easy nod and offers a trade, a pair of the morning's catch for a small bundle of thyme and fennel. Persephone accepts, and soon you're walking back with the fish swinging lightly between you. By midday, the mist begins to thin, and slivers of blue peek through the high clouds. The village stirs into louder movement, doors thrown open, laundry hung to dry, the rhythm of hammers and chisels from the carpenters at work. Children run in the lanes again, their laughter sharp and bright after the hush of morning. You help clean the fish in a shallow wooden basin outside, the scent of the river clinging to your fingers. Persephone works with quick, neat movements, scattering the innards into the garden for the soil. Nothing goes to waste, she murmurs, half to herself. Soon the fish are sizzling over the fire, their skin blistering and crisp, sending curls of fragrant smoke up toward the rafters. The meal is eaten with flatbread and olives, and the conversation wanders lazily from planting seasons to the old songs sung during harvest. At one point, a woman begins a tune you've never heard before, slow, winding, and strangely haunting. Persephone hums along under her breath, and you can't tell if she's recalling a memory or creating something new in that moment. Afternoon stretches gently, the kind where time feels more like a tide than a clock. You accompany her to the edge of the fields where young shoots are beginning to pierce the damp soil. She kneels, fingers brushing over the green tips, and smiles faintly. "It's early yet," she says, "but they'll grow quickly now." The earth has decided to wake up. You think about how she says it, not the season will change, but the earth has decided, as if the soil itself is alive and thinking, as if she's privy to its quiet moods. As the evening draws close, the mist returns, not as thick as before, but enough to soften the edges of the world again. Lanterns glow more warmly in the haze, their light blurring into soft halos. A light drizzle begins, just enough to pepper the air with coolness, and Persephone tilts her face up to it, eyes closed. For a moment, she looks almost entirely at peace. Back inside, the fire is lit again, and the two of you sit with steaming cups of herbal tea, mint and lemon balm, sharp and soothing. Outside, the drizzle whispers against the roof. Persephone traces idle patterns in the condensation on her cup, and you catch a fleeting expression in her eyes, something wistful, almost mournful. But then she smiles, small, deliberate, and the moment passes like mist burning away under the sun. The night folds in softly, leaving the world feeling suspended between waking and dreaming. You wonder how many more of these days remain, and whether she's counting them in her mind, the way you are. The next morning begins with the sound of low bells drifting in from somewhere beyond the village. At first, you think it's the goats again, but these chimes are deeper, slower, and there's a deliberate pause between each note, as though someone is striking metal with intention rather than accident. You rise to find Persephone already gone from her bed, the covers neatly folded back. Outside, the air is crisp and startlingly clear after yesterday's mist, as if the world has been rinsed clean. Every leaf on every tree glitters with tiny droplets, catching the sharp gold of the sun. The mountains are fully visible again, blue-gray ridges layered against each other, fading into the pale horizon. Smoke from hearths rises in perfect vertical threads before dissolving into the light. You follow the sound of the bells toward the far side of the village. People are gathering there, dressed a little finer than usual, wool tunics combed free of burrs, aprons washed, hair braided neatly. There's an air of quiet ceremony in their movements. Persephone is standing near the well, speaking with an older woman whose face is lined like river stones. When she sees you, she waves you closer. It's planting day for the communal fields, she explains. The bells call everyone to the blessing. She says the word blessing without irony, as if it's simply a part of the way the earth works. You walk with her into the crowd, feeling the ground change beneath your boots, from hard-packed dirt to the softer, darker soil near the tilled plots. An elder with hair as white as drifted snow stands at the edge of the first furrow, holding a small clay bowl. He dips his fingers into it and scatters something over the earth, seeds, perhaps, or crushed herbs, their scent faint but resinous. His voice carries in a steady rhythm, chanting words you can't understand but feel in your bones. The crowd listens in absolute stillness, save for the occasional cry of a bird overhead. Persephone steps forward at one point, kneeling to press her palm flat against the soil. Her eyes close briefly, and though she says nothing, you have the distinct impression she's listening again, just as she did by the river. When she stands, her hand is smudged with rich, dark earth, and she doesn't brush it away. Once the blessing is done, the quiet breaks into gentle activity. Men and women take up baskets of seeds, moving down the long rows with careful precision. The seeds make a faint pattering sound as they fall, quickly swallowed by the soil. Children follow, laughing as they help scatter straw over the planted ground. Persephone hands you a basket of your own. Just let them fall, she says, but think of what you want to see grow. It sounds simple enough, but as you walk the furrows, each handful of seeds feels oddly significant, tiny grains slipping between your fingers, each one a fragment of a possible future. You find yourself wondering what the earth might make of your thoughts. By midday, the work is done, and the fields are marked with neat, straw-covered rows. The sun has warmed the soil enough that a light shimmer rises from it, distorting the view of the far hedgerow. Lunch is served communally, platters of roasted root vegetables, thick loaves of bread, and pitchers of cool water from the well. People sit together in the open, voices mingling in the easy, unhurried way of those who have worked side by side for years. In the afternoon, Persephone leads you to a small grove just beyond the fields. The ground there is carpeted with moss, soft underfoot, and a ring of tall beeches encloses the space. Sunlight filters down in broken, shifting patterns. "This is where I come when I need to think," she says, settling onto a low rock. The trees here don't mind listening. You sit with her in the dappled quiet, the smell of damp leaves and bark all around. After a while, she speaks again, but her tone is different, less like conversation, more like confession. "I think I've been here too long," she says softly. "I've forgotten how the other places feel." Her gaze is fixed on the far distance, where the trees open just enough to glimpse a sliver of sky. The wind stirs the branches, and a scatter of leaves drifts down between you. You're not sure what to say, so you say nothing, letting the silence hold the shape of her words. She doesn't seem to mind. As the evening approaches, the two of you return to the village. The smell of baking bread meets you long before you reach the first houses. Inside, the hearth glows, and Persephone busies herself with stirring a pot of lentils and herbs. You take a seat by the fire, feeling the day's work settling pleasantly into your muscles. After supper, the bells ring again, but this time only 3 slow chimes, echoing into the night. Persephone looks toward the door as if listening for something more, but nothing follows. She shakes her head, half smiling. "Just the wind catching the ropes," she says, though her voice suggests she's not entirely certain. Later, lying in the dim quiet, you think of the seeds buried in the fields, the soil holding them close. Somewhere beneath the surface, the slow, invisible work of growth has already begun. The morning after the planting feels different, quieter, but not in a way that suggests absence. It's more like the hush that follows a song when the last note is still hanging in the air. You wake to the faint smell of damp earth seeping through the shutters and the sound of someone sweeping outside. When you open the door, Persephone is already at work, pulling the broom in long, measured strokes across the packed dirt. She glances up briefly, offering a smile, then nods toward the eastern hills. "There's a market today," she says. "Not here, 2 valleys over. It's worth the walk." You set off after a quick breakfast of bread and cheese, following a narrow path that winds away from the village. The route takes you through a stretch of meadows still heavy with morning dew. Grass bends under your boots, releasing the clean, green scent of bruised stalks. At one point, you pass a line of alder trees along a stream, their roots knuckled and exposed, gripping the bank like old hands. The water runs fast and clear, flashing silver in the light. After about an hour, the land begins to change. The slopes here are steeper, the air cooler. In the distance, you hear the murmur of many voices, mingling with the faint bray of donkeys and the occasional clatter of wooden wheels. The path crests a low ridge, and suddenly the market is spread out below, a loose, irregular sprawl of tents and carts, bright cloth snapping in the wind. As you step into the market's edge, the scents hit you first: warm honey cakes, smoked fish, herbs crushed underfoot, and the faint metallic tang of worked iron. Stalls are arranged in uneven rows, each one piled with goods: skeins of dyed wool, jars of pickled vegetables, baskets of early apples still blushed from the tree. Persephone moves easily through the crowd, nodding to sellers she knows, stopping to exchange a few words here and there. You notice she never haggles, simply placing the right number of coins in each outstretched hand. At one stall, she buys a bundle of dried lavender; at another, a small loaf of dark bread studded with seeds. You wander a little apart from her, drawn by the sound of a stringed instrument being played somewhere nearby. You find the musician sitting cross-legged on a low stool, plucking a tune that feels both old and oddly familiar. His case is open beside him, holding a scattering of coins and a single feather, striped black and white. While you listen, an old woman at the next stall calls you over. Her table is laid out with small clay amulets, some in the shape of leaves, others like tiny animals. She gestures at your hand, as if asking to see it, then presses a cool, flat disc into your palm. The surface is etched with a pattern that looks like interlocking waves. For safe crossing, she says simply. You think to give it back, but she shakes her head. It's not for sale. When you rejoin Persephone, she notices the amulet and tilts her head. She doesn't give those to just anyone. She doesn't elaborate, but her voice carries a kind of quiet respect. By midday, the market grows busier. A troop of children runs past carrying ribbons, their laughter trailing in the air. A man in a tall, battered hat sells spiced cider from a steaming pot, the cups warming your hands as you drink. The taste is sharp and sweet, with a heat that lingers long after you swallow. Eventually, Persephone suggests heading back before the light starts to fade. The walk home feels slower, weighed down by the day's impressions. The sky is changing, thin clouds gathering in high, pale streaks, and a faint scent of rain on the wind. When you return to the village, the fields you helped plant yesterday look just the same as before, bare rows under straw. Yet standing there, you feel a subtle difference, as if something beneath the soil has shifted, begun. Persephone sets her basket down and looks toward the horizon, where the hills are now softened by a gray wash of distance. That woman at the market, she says at last, she once told me the earth remembers every step we take on it. She glances at you, eyes unreadable. I wonder what it remembers of you. That night, as rain begins to patter softly against the roof, you find yourself turning the amulet over in your hand again and again. The etched waves catch the firelight, holding it in their grooves. You slip it into your pocket before sleep, though you can't quite say why. The rain has settled into a steady, even rhythm by morning, drumming gently on the thatch and trickling in silver threads from the eaves. You wake to the sound and stay still for a while, listening, feeling the weight of the blanket and the faint, earthy chill that comes with wet weather. Outside, the light is muted, less a sunrise than a gradual brightening of gray. Persephone is already awake, moving quietly around the room. She's wrapped in a dark wool shawl, her hair pinned up messily, a few loose strands clinging to her neck. On the table, she has laid out a small pot of honey, a wedge of hard cheese, and the bread she bought yesterday. Steam rises from 2 clay cups of something hot and spiced. Drink before it cools, she says, sliding one toward you. The first sip is sharp with ginger, softened by honey. It wakes you in a way the pale light can't. Today, she explains, there's work to be done indoors. The rain will keep most people inside, but it's an opportunity to prepare, mend tools, sort seeds, grind dried herbs. She leads you to a storeroom behind the main living space, its air thick with the mingled scents of rosemary, beeswax, and stored grain. The room is dim, lit by a single oil lamp set high on a shelf. Along one wall, baskets of seeds are arranged in careful rows, each marked with a strip of cloth bearing a symbol you don't recognize. Persephone lifts one down, handing it to you. Inside are smooth, dark beans, almost black except for a faint reddish sheen when they catch the light. We'll need these in a month, she says, but the shells are too hard. We soak them first. She gestures toward a wide clay bowl, half filled with water from the rain barrel outside. The beans sink slowly as you drop them in, their weight making small, soft splashes. While they soak, Persephone shows you how to repair a cracked wooden scoop. The work is patient, shaving the damaged edge smooth with a small knife, brushing the surface with oil until the grain darkens, then binding it with a thin strip of reed. The smell of the oil is warm and nutty, lingering on your fingers. Hours pass quietly. Rain patters against the shutters, sometimes louder, sometimes almost fading to a whisper before picking up again. Every so often, you hear the distant bleat of a goat or the muffled cluck of hens from somewhere behind the house. At midday, Persephone opens the shutters a little to let in more light. Outside, the village looks softened, edges blurred by the curtain of rain. Children run laughing along the lane, their bare feet splashing in puddles, hair plastered to their foreheads. An old man walks past leading a donkey piled high with bundles wrapped in oilcloth. You eat lunch at the table, barley stew thickened with lentils, sprinkled with chopped greens. The warmth seeps through you, making the rain seem farther away, almost like something happening in another place entirely. After the meal, Persephone retrieves a bundle wrapped in linen from a high shelf. She unfolds it to reveal a set of carved wooden figures, each about the length of your hand. They're worn smooth with age, the details softened, but you can still make out their shapes, animals, mostly, a hare, a fox, a small bird with its wings tucked close. These, she says, were my grandmother's. She used them to tell stories on nights like this. She places the fox in your hand. It's lighter than you expect, the wood polished to a satin sheen. It's good luck to let someone else choose the story. You turn the figure over slowly, feeling the small grooves and notches. Something about it reminds you of the amulet from the market, though you can't quite say why. Persephone begins her tale without any introduction, her voice low and even, blending with the rain. It's a story about a fox who tricks the river into changing its course, not out of malice but because her den will flood if it rises too high. The fox speaks to the river as if it were an old friend, persuading it with flattery, with jokes, with quiet persistence. In the end, the river bends away, sparing the den, but only for a season. Next year, the fox must speak to it again. When the story ends, Persephone sets the figures aside and wraps them back in the linen. She doesn't explain the meaning, but you suspect it's not meant to be fixed in place, more like a seed, left to grow on its own in the mind. By late afternoon, the rain has eased to a mist, softening the edges of everything it touches. The smell of wet earth drifts in through the open shutters, cool and clean. You help carry the soaked beans to the hearth, where they'll rest overnight. As evening comes, you find yourself standing at the doorway, looking out into the quiet. Somewhere in the fields beyond the village, water gathers and seeps down to where the seeds lie buried. You can't see it, but you can almost feel it, small changes, happening in darkness, waiting for the right moment to push through. Behind you, Persephone stirs the embers and adds a log to the fire. Tomorrow, she says, we'll see what's come loose in the soil. Her tone is casual, but her eyes linger on yours for a beat longer than usual. You sit by the fire that night, the warmth on your face, the sound of the rain now no more than a faint memory against the roof. The amulet rests in your pocket, its carved waves pressed lightly against your palm. Morning comes without fanfare. There is no sharp sunrise, no golden flood of light, just the gradual dimming of shadows, the world outside the shutters brightening from charcoal to a softened gray blue. The rain has stopped, but the air is still heavy with its scent, and when you open the door, the ground glistens, every blade of grass tipped with tiny droplets. Persephone is at the table, mending a leather strap with a curved needle. She glances up when you enter, but doesn't speak right away, as if the hush left behind by the rain is something worth keeping for a few moments longer. On the hearth, a small pot of barley porridge simmers, sending up wisps of steam. "Eat," she says at last, gesturing with her chin. You fill a bowl, the heat of it warming your hands. The porridge is plain except for a scattering of dried berries, their tartness a small spark against the soft grain. Today, she tells you, you'll walk beyond the cultivated fields to where the wild growth begins. The rains will have loosened the earth, and certain roots can be pulled more easily now. You're not entirely sure what she means, but there's no urgency in her tone, only the calm certainty that it's the right time to go. You dress in the heavier cloak she lent you, the wool still faintly smelling of wood smoke, and follow her along the lane that winds between low stone walls. Water gathers in shallow pools along the edges, reflecting pale strips of sky. As you pass the last of the houses, the land opens into a stretch of open field, green muted by the damp. Here, you notice the ground is uneven, as if something beneath has shifted over the years, small dips and rises that catch the morning light differently. Persephone moves steadily ahead, stepping over puddles without looking down, her path seemingly instinctive. Beyond the field lies a fringe of trees, their bare winter branches tangled against one another. The soil here is darker, richer, and your boots sink slightly with each step. She kneels at the base of a slender alder, fingers working into the wet ground until she finds the root. When she pulls, it comes up easily, trailing earth and fine feeder threads. "This one's for dye," she says, placing it in your hand. The root smells faintly of iron and something sharp, almost metallic. She shows you how to trim away the thin outer layer to reveal the pale, fibrous inside. "We'll boil it until the water runs red." You move together from tree to tree, root to root. Sometimes she hums quietly under her breath, no tune you recognize, just a line of sound that rises and falls with the rhythm of the work. It blends with the distant rush of water somewhere beyond sight, likely a stream swollen from the rain. After a while, you come to a place where the trees give way to low, tangled growth. Here, Persephone crouches again, parting the wet stems to reveal a cluster of small, tightly wound shoots. She pinches one between her fingers, testing its firmness. "These," she says, "are for food, if you know how to coax the bitterness out. Not many bother anymore." The work is unhurried. You fall into a pattern, dig, shake the soil free, tuck the finds into the cloth bag she carries slung across her shoulder. The smell of wet earth clings to your hands, grounding you in the moment. When the bag is nearly full, she leads you to a rise where the trees thin out, giving a clear view of the land below. The village lies small in the distance, its smoke rising in delicate spirals. Beyond it, the fields stretch toward the horizon, their edges blurred by the lingering mist. You sit together on a fallen log, sharing the last of the bread from her pouch. The crust is tough, the inside dense and faintly sweet. You eat without speaking, the silence comfortable, the kind that doesn't need filling. After the rest, Persephone points to a darker line on the far edge of the view, what at first you think might be a shadow, but which she explains is the edge of the old forest. "We'll go there soon," she says, "but not yet. The ground needs more time." Back at the house, the roots are laid out on the table, their colors muted until the boiling brings them to life. She fills a wide pot with water and sets it over the fire. As it heats, the smell shifts, earthy at first, then sharper, with a tang that catches in your throat. Slowly, the water deepens in color, turning the hue of rusted metal. While it boils, she grinds a handful of dried leaves into powder, adding them to a smaller pot where another dye is brewing, this one green, the color soft as moss. You watch the steam curl upward, carrying the mingled scents into the rafters. As the light fades, she hangs lengths of undyed cloth from a beam overhead. When the boiling is done, she lowers the first piece into the red dye, using a stick to press it under. The fabric drinks the color quickly, deepening to a shade that reminds you of autumn leaves caught in late afternoon light. By the time the last cloth is dyed, Night has fallen fully. The house smells of fire and roots, of work completed. You help her hang the pieces to dry, each one dripping slowly into the bowls placed below to catch the excess. Persephone sits by the fire afterward, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She seems more still than usual, as if the day's work has settled something in her. Every color, she says quietly, comes from something that had to be pulled from the ground. The words linger with you long after you've gone to bed. You lie awake in the dim glow from the embers, the faint creak of drying cloth overhead, and the memory of the forest's edge waiting somewhere beyond sight. The morning breaks colder than any you've felt since arriving. When you open your eyes, your breath leaves a faint cloud in the air, and the fire in the hearth has burned down to little more than a hollow bed of embers. Outside, the light is dim and colorless, as if the sky itself hasn't quite decided to commit to day. Persephone is already awake, crouched by the hearth feeding it thin twigs and crumpled bark to coax the flames higher. The smell of smoke is sharp, fresh, and it stings your nose in a way that feels strangely welcome. She doesn't greet you with words, just a nod toward the cloak folded neatly on the bench, thicker than the one you wore yesterday, lined with something soft that rustles faintly when you lift it. "We'll walk further today," she says after a moment, eyes on the growing fire. "Not all the way, but close enough to see the place." You don't have to ask which place. The image of the dark line on the horizon, the one she called the old forest, has been fixed in your mind since yesterday. Breakfast is quick and plain, a wedge of dark bread, a smear of soft cheese, and a cup of water still cool from the night air. Persephone tucks a small packet into her satchel before she slings it over her shoulder, and you both step out into the brittle chill. The village is quiet, smoke curling from only a few chimneys. Frost glitters faintly along the low stone walls, melting in tiny rivulets when you brush past. The fields beyond are glazed with it too, and your breath hangs in the air behind you like a trail you could follow back if needed. You retrace the same path as yesterday at first, the uneven ground, the bare alder trees, but where you turned toward the dry roots before, today you keep going. The land slopes downward into a shallow valley, the air settling cooler here. In the distance, the old forest is no longer just a thin line but a wall, dense, dark, and unmoving, its upper branches woven so tightly that even the pale winter light can't seem to find a way through. The closer you draw, the more the air changes. It's not just the cold, it's heavier, quieter, as though even the wind avoids passing through. The sound of your boots on the damp earth becomes more pronounced, each step accompanied by the faint pull of mud. Persephone slows near a wide ditch that cuts across the ground. It's shallow, more a depression than a true trench, but she stops at the edge as though it's a boundary line. She kneels and runs her fingers through the damp grass, parting it to reveal a strip of bare, dark soil underneath. "This," she says softly, "was once a marker. No one crossed without cause." You glance toward the trees. They're close now, close enough that you can make out the pale lichen clinging to the lower trunks and the black gaps between them. You feel watched, not by eyes exactly, but by the deep, unblinking stillness. Persephone sits back on her heels and looks toward the forest as if considering whether to speak. When she does, her voice is quieter, almost more to herself than to you. Roots go deeper there than anywhere else. Not all of them are trees. The words make you think of yesterday's dye work, of pulling something living from the earth. But here, in this place, the idea feels different, less like gathering and more like disturbing something that prefers not to be touched. She stands again and gestures for you to follow her along the ditch's edge. You walk until it curves, creating a crescent that cups a small rise in the ground. From here, you can see a break in the forest wall, a narrow, shadowed gap where the undergrowth doesn't seem to grow as thick. "That's where we'll go, when the ground's ready," she says. "It leads further than it appears." You want to ask what she means, but the way she watches the gap tells you she wouldn't answer. Instead, you both sit on the rise and share the bread she brought, eating in silence. The forest looms ahead, still and unchanging, but the longer you look, the more you think you see movement, tiny shifts of shadow between the trunks, like something turning away before you can be certain it was there. When you leave, you keep glancing back, half expecting the trees to have shifted, the gap to have closed. But it remains, exactly as it was, until the slope and the curve of the land hide it from view. By the time you return to the village, the frost has melted from the fields. Persephone sets her satchel on the table, but doesn't unpack it. Instead, she sits by the window, looking toward the direction you came from, though the forest is far beyond sight now. You'll know when it's time, she says without turning to you. But when we go in, we won't be looking for roots. That night, lying in bed, you try to imagine what you will be looking for instead, and why it can only be found in a place where the air is too still and the shadows never quite hold their shape. You wake before dawn, though you don't remember deciding to. The air in the room feels colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles in your chest and makes you breathe shallowly without thinking. Outside, the light hasn't yet begun to touch the horizon. Everything beyond the window is an unbroken sheet of shadow. Persephone is already awake. She stands by the table, packing her satchel with deliberate care. You hear the quiet clink of a small glass jar, the rustle of cloth, the soft scrape of a wooden lid sliding shut. She doesn't look at you until she's finished tying the strap closed. "It's time," she says simply. You sit up slowly, feeling that peculiar heaviness again, the same as near the forest, but sharper now, as if your body has already guessed where you're going. The thick-lined cloak waits on the bench, its weight settles across your shoulders like something more than wool. Breakfast is wordless, just as it was yesterday: bread, cheese, water. Persephone eats little, her gaze drifting to the door as if she's listening for something outside. When the first pale thread of dawn unwinds in the sky, she stands and lifts the latch. The village is almost unnaturally still. No smoke rises from the chimneys yet, no voices or footsteps echo across the frostbitten paths. The air bites your face as you walk, each inhalation a thin ribbon of ice in your lungs. The route is the same as before, past the stone walls, through the alder trees, down into the shallow valley. But there is no pause at the ditch today. Persephone steps over it without ceremony, her boots leaving deep, clear prints in the damp soil. You hesitate for a heartbeat before following, the ground giving a faint sucking sound as it releases your foot. Crossing feels like passing through an unseen film of air, cooler, heavier, edged with a scent you can't name. The forest is only a dozen strides away now, its edge crisp in the muted morning light. Each trunk is furred with pale lichen, the lower branches bare and clawing sideways. The gap you saw yesterday is ahead, darker than the spaces around it. It isn't wide, you could touch both edges if you stretched out your arms, but it seems to pull at your gaze, the way deep water does. Persephone pauses just before the opening. She turns to you, and in the half-light her eyes seem darker than you remember. "Once we're inside," she says, "don't look back until I tell you." The words are so calm, so certain, that you nod without asking why. The first step onto the forest floor is softer than expected. Moss grows in thick, uneven mats, springy underfoot, muffling every sound. The air is damp, rich with the smell of earth and something older, something like stone after rain, but deeper, colder. Light filters weakly through the canopy, fractured into shards that barely touch the ground. You realize quickly that the shadows aren't uniform, they shift, slow and deliberate, as though the trees themselves are moving fractionally, adjusting their positions when you aren't watching. Persephone moves with quiet familiarity, choosing her steps carefully between roots as thick as your arm. Some twist out of the ground only to plunge back in a few feet away, like something coiling just under the surface. You try not to think of her words about roots not all belonging to trees. The deeper you go, the less sound there is. No birds, no insects, only the soft press of your own footsteps and the occasional creak of wood that doesn't seem to come from any single direction. Once, you think you hear water dripping, but when you listen harder, it stops. After what feels like a long stretch of silence, Persephone slows and gestures toward a massive fallen trunk ahead. It lies across your path like a barricade, its bark split and furred with a thick carpet of pale growth. She crouches, running her fingers lightly over the moss, then pulls a small knife from her satchel. She slices away a thin section and wraps it carefully in cloth before tucking it away. Old wood keeps what it knows, she murmurs, almost to herself. You climb over the trunk to follow her, the wood soft beneath your hands, giving slightly under pressure. On the other side, the air feels even denser, as though you've moved one layer deeper into something that doesn't want to be peeled apart. A short distance ahead, the ground dips into a shallow basin. At its center stands a tree unlike the others. Its bark is smooth and silvery, unmarked by lichen, its base flared and ridged like the ribs of a shell. Around it, the moss is darker, almost black. Persephone stops at the edge of the basin and rests a hand lightly on your arm. "Not today," she says. "But soon." You don't ask why, not because you don't want to know, but because the air here makes you feel that speaking too much might carry your voice somewhere it shouldn't go. When you turn to leave, you feel the pull of curiosity in your back, like a hand pressing between your shoulders. You keep your eyes forward, resisting the urge to glance at the silver-barked tree one more time. Only when you step back through the narrow gap at the forest's edge does Persephone say, "You can look now." You turn, but the gap seems darker than it should be, the shapes inside already blurring into shadow. For a moment, you're not certain the silver-barked tree was ever there at all. The next day is all wind. It starts before sunrise, a restless rattling in the shutters that wakes you from a shallow, dreamless sleep. The air in the room is warmer than yesterday but smells faintly of damp wood, as if rain has been moving somewhere nearby. Outside the window, the dark is streaked with shifting patterns of movement, bare branches against a bruised sky, restless and bent sideways by gusts. Persephone does not move quickly this morning. She sits at the table with her satchel open, slowly sorting its contents into small, precise bundles. Each is wrapped in cloth and tied with a thin strip of plant fiber. Her hair is braided tightly down her back, and you notice a thin cord wound around her wrist that you've never seen before. It looks almost like woven roots. "We go deeper today," she says, without looking up. You eat in silence. The bread is heavier than usual, the crust tasting faintly of smoke, and you take more water than food. Something in your stomach feels aware of the forest already, tightening against it. The village is not as still as before, people are awake, though no one speaks above a murmur. You catch fragments of their voices as you pass, words you can't piece together, and their eyes slide past you as though they'd rather not see who is walking with Persephone. The ditch comes and goes without pause. You feel it again, the shift, the cool membrane of air that clings to your skin for a few seconds before seeping in. The wind that troubled the village seems to fade as soon as you step beyond it, replaced by a dense stillness, as if the forest is holding itself very still to listen. The gap in the trees is there, darker than before, the shape of it sharp-edged against the dim morning light. Persephone steps through, and you follow without hesitation this time. The moss drinks the sound of your steps, and the air swells with that same mineral-rich scent, like the inside of a stone well after rain. It's dimmer now. The sky must be clouded, because even the thin shafts of light you saw yesterday have vanished, replaced by a uniform shadow that softens every edge. The trees seem closer together. Their trunks lean in at faint but perceptible angles, as though they've been growing towards some hidden center for years. Persephone's path is not the same as yesterday's. She turns where you expect her to go straight, stepping over roots that coil like thick ropes. At one point she slows and points to a low hollow between two stumps. At first you see only a tangle of twigs, but then a shape resolves, a shallow depression lined with small stones, filled with water so still it reflects the branches perfectly. "Don't touch it," she says. "It remembers what it's shown." You keep walking. The basin from yesterday appears eventually, but from a different angle. The silver-barked tree stands there, unchanged. In the flat light, it seems brighter, the smoothness of its trunk broken only by faint ripples in the grain, like something has shifted just beneath its surface. Persephone descends into the basin this time. You follow, feeling the change in the ground, softer, more saturated, as if each step presses into a sponge. The moss here has a strange resilience, springing back slowly when your foot lifts. When you are close enough to touch the silver bark, you realize it has no scent. Not of wood, or moss, or damp, nothing. It feels wrong, like a space in the air where a smell should be. Persephone kneels and sets down her satchel. She unwraps one of the small bundles and takes out a flat, dark stone with faint carvings scratched into its surface. She places it against the roots of the tree and presses her palm flat over it, closing her eyes. At first there is nothing. Then you notice the faintest movement. The ridged base of the tree seems to expand and contract, almost imperceptibly, as if drawing a long, slow breath. Persephone opens her eyes but doesn't look at you. "It listens," she says. "Not like we do. It listens through what's beneath us." You glance down at the moss, at the thick roots vanishing into the ground. Somewhere far below, water moves slowly, following paths that might have been carved before the village was even here. She leaves the stone where it is and wraps up the cloth it came in. Then she stands and walks around the tree in a slow circle, pausing once to lay her fingertips against the trunk. You follow at a distance, your steps measured, careful not to make more sound than you have to. When she finishes her circuit, she says, "Now it will think about what it's heard." The way she says it makes you feel as though the silver-barked tree is not a thing to hurry. The walk back is stranger than the walk in. You keep thinking you hear something moving just out of sight, a faint shift of moss, a sigh of air against wood, but when you glance in that direction, there is only stillness. The gap appears ahead sooner than expected, and the sky beyond is a pale, washed-out gray. Once you step through, the wind returns all at once, tugging at your cloak and filling your ears with restless noise. It feels almost jarring after the deep stillness of the forest. Persephone doesn't speak on the way back to the village. You follow her in silence, but you know, without knowing how, that the silver-barked tree will remember you now. The next morning, the wind is gone. It has not died down gradually, the way a storm's breath sometimes does. It has simply stopped, leaving the air so still that every sound feels sharper. The faint creak of wood in the walls, the tick of the pot settling on the stove, even your own breathing, each falls into the quiet like a drop of water into a still pool. Persephone is ready before you wake. She stands by the doorway with her satchel closed and slung over her shoulder, a coil of rope looped in one hand. Her hair is unbound today, falling over her shoulders like dark water, and in the muted morning light her face looks more like the forest than the village. "We go back," she says. "It has something to show us." You eat nothing before leaving. The bread from yesterday sits untouched on the table. You do not feel hunger anyway. The walk through the village is even stranger now. No one is outside. The windows you pass are shuttered, but you think you can feel people behind them, aware of you but choosing not to be seen. The ditch comes quickly. You expect the subtle breath of cold air when you cross it, but this time it's different. Instead of the usual membrane of coolness, you feel a faint pressure in your ears, as though stepping into a lower place beneath the rest of the world. It passes after a few steps, leaving your skin tingling. The gap is there, waiting. No more or less distinct than before, but you feel no hesitation in stepping through. The moment you do, you sense it, the forest is not the same. The air is heavier, and though there is no wind, you can feel an undercurrent in it, like something moving just beneath the surface. The moss absorbs your steps, but the silence is not empty. Faint, irregular sounds thread through it, a low groan, the crack of wood settling, the distant patter of something you can't see. You realize, after a few minutes, that the sounds do not come from above or around, but from below. Persephone leads you on a path that feels less chosen than given. She does not glance around as she walks, yet she takes turns you don't remember from before. You pass clusters of trees whose trunks are streaked with faint white marks, as though brushed by the hands of someone carrying ash. Some of them lean toward you as you pass, only slightly, but enough to notice. The basin appears again, its moss darkened by what might be dew, or something heavier. The silver-barked tree stands exactly where it should, but its surface seems to shift almost imperceptibly as you look at it, like light through water. Persephone stops at the rim of the basin and looks down at it for a long moment before speaking. "Do you see it?" she asks. You do not answer at first. You think she might mean the rippling in the bark, but then you notice something else. The ground around the base of the tree, which yesterday was smooth and even, now shows faint lines, furrows in the moss, radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. In the dim light, they are so subtle you might mistake them for shadows. She descends into the basin, and you follow. The air feels different here, denser, as if carrying more weight than it can comfortably bear. You feel it in your chest as you breathe. Persephone kneels by the root where she placed the carved stone yesterday. The stone is still there, but the moss around it is pressed flat, as though something broad and heavy rested there in the night. She brushes away the moss from the stone's surface, and you see that the carvings have changed, no longer shallow, they are deeper, sharper, and new lines have appeared between the old ones, branching like the veins of a leaf. "It answered," she says. Her voice is low, but not with fear, more like someone speaking in a place where echoes are alive. She places both palms on the silver bark, and after a moment, nods for you to do the same. The moment your skin meets it, you feel something, not movement, not warmth, but recognition. As though the tree is not just aware of you, but recalling you, the way a person might recall a voice heard long ago. It does not feel like a mind. It feels like an expanse, a vast, layered thing that does not move quickly but holds on to everything it has taken in. Then, faint, almost beyond perception, you sense a pull. Not physical, but directional. A suggestion, like the way a current can carry a leaf without disturbing the surface of the water. It points somewhere beyond the basin, deeper into the forest. Persephone steps back and lets go of the bark. It wants us to follow. She takes the rope from her shoulder and loops it loosely around her own wrist, then offers you the other end. You take it without thinking. When you leave the basin, you notice the forest has grown darker, though the sky above still has that dull gray light. The air is cooler, and you feel the sense of direction not from your eyes, but from somewhere in your chest, as though your own breath is leaning forward. The path ahead is unfamiliar, and you can no longer tell if Persephone is leading you or if the forest itself is doing so. The rope between you sways lightly with each step, a small reminder that the connection is not just between you and her now, but between both of you and something older, something listening, something waiting. The pull grows stronger with every step, though it never forces you. It is a quiet insistence, a steady hand at the center of your chest, drawing you deeper. You walk until the light changes, not dimming, not brightening, but thickening, as if it has gathered into something you can almost touch. The rope between you and Persephone feels heavier now. She glances back only once, her eyes calm but alert, as if she too knows you are nearing something that will not let you turn back. The trees part without wind or sound. It is not like a gate opening, more like a curtain of leaves and branches that leans away just enough to let you pass. Beyond is a hollow unlike the rest of the forest. The ground is bare, the air warmer, and in the center stands another tree. It is not silver like the last. Its bark is black, not from burning, but from something older, with so dense it reflects no light. Its branches are bare, yet from each one hangs a single strip of cloth, faded to pale gray, moving slightly though there is no breeze. You stop at the edge of the hollow. The pull does not urge you forward anymore, it simply waits. Persephone lowers the rope from her wrist and steps closer, careful, her feet making no sound on the bare earth. "This is the route," she says, but her voice is different, less certain, as though she is not speaking to you alone. You follow her, slow, until you stand before the black bark. The surface is warm under your fingers, and as soon as you touch it, you feel a depth beneath it, not hollow, but vast, like an ocean folded into wood. And within that depth, something stirs. It is not a voice. It is not a thought. It is a pattern, long, slow movements of meaning, like the tide. You cannot hold them all at once, you can only let them pass through you. You see fragments, the silver-barked tree standing in younger soil, the basin filled with still water reflecting a different sky, Persephone walking here alone, years before you knew her. And then something else, yourself, but not as you are now. You are younger, or older, or both. You are walking the same path but in another season, and you realize the forest has known you longer than you have known yourself. When you pull your hand away, the warmth lingers. Persephone is watching you, her expression unreadable. She ties the rope back to her wrist, but loosely now, as if you might not need it anymore. "We can leave," she says. "It knows you'll come back." The path out feels shorter. You do not look back until the basin is far behind, and even then you see only the familiar trees. The ditch appears sooner than you expect. Crossing it feels like stepping up into brighter air, the faint pressure in your ears vanishing. The village is the same as before, quiet, still. But as you walk past the shuttered windows, you think you see movement behind one of them, a small tilt of a head, a figure stepping away. When you reach Persephone's door, she does not ask you in. She stands in the doorway, holding the rope coiled in her hand, and nods once. "Rest," she says. "It will find you when it's ready." You walk home with the quiet still in your ears, the memory of the black bark warm against your palm. That night, you dream not of the hollow or the basin, but of the space between, those shifting paths where the air seemed to lean forward, showing you the way. And when you wake, you know exactly where the gap in the forest will be.